Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Yusufullah here. So welcome everyone to today's training, my three-step process of how to master the core of the Arabic language so that you can begin reading an actual Arabic book within 21 days. And the best part is that without any tedious memorization, without any pointless exercises, and without any unnecessary homework, because I know that these are the things that often get in the way. So we're going to get rid of all of that. And I'm going to show you this by drawing your attention to the big mistake that practically everyone is making in their study of the Arabic language. It's severely hampering them and it's stopping them from achieving results in a very big way. And they might be getting some results from the flawed approach that they're adopting, but one Ramadan comes and goes, two Ramadan comes and goes, and they still can't understand and appreciate even the basic message of the verses that they're hearing in the Tarawih prayers. So what I'm saying is that all of that is unnecessary. And there's a particular approach that can accelerate your progress by a factor of 17. And that's 1600%. And I know that's a big, bold claim in a world filled with hype, but just allow me the opportunity to prove that to you. And inshallah, by the end of today's presentation, I will explain to you that not only is it possible to learn Arabic 17 times faster, but it's actually essential, because without it, you get no momentum. So we're gonna move to the computer right now, and I'll continue speaking with you there. Together, this material will give you half of all of your benefits. Half of all of the Arabic you will ever achieve in your life, you will get it within these 3 hours. And I mean, that's ridiculous. It sounds ridiculous. But again, I asked you to suspend your judgment. And right now, I will explain to you what it is exactly that makes Arabic the most superior language and why it's so unique and why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose it as the medium for his final message. So let's begin. There is something within the Arabic language that makes it unique because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose it as the medium for his final message. And you have to agree with this, that he did that because there are elements in the language that make it unique and make it different, make it special, and make it superior. So if you wanted to sum that up in a single word, it would be the word that you're seeing on the screen, and that word is comprehensiveness. Ibn Khaldun, he wrote centuries ago, and he said that what in other languages require separate words to convey, in Arabic it's communicated through vowels, patterns, grammatical structures, like non-words. So if you had, a paragraph of sentences in Arabic, and you wanted to translate that into any other language, you would need at least twice the amount of words, if not even more than that, right? So bottom line is that the majority of meanings in Arabic do not come from words. They come from vowels, patterns, and grammatical structures. So this is the topic of the presentation. We're going to speak about all three of these areas. So let's speak about vowels, right? So how languages convey meaning. So here's the very basic example that we like to lead with. If you have a verb and two nouns, if you have what? A verb and two nouns, then you need to communicate which of the two nouns is the one doing the verb, and which of the two nouns is the one upon whom the verb is being done. Because if you can't do that, there will be mass confusion, and your listener won't be able to tell whether Zayd hit Amr or whether Amr hit Zayd. Communication would cease to exist. So every language needs a mechanism to be able to determine and differentiate between the roles of the nouns within the sentence. Okay, so there needs to be a mechanism. There needs to be a way of doing it. So some languages do this by adding extra words. So apart from the verb and the two nouns, you'd have a fourth word and a fifth word. And using that fourth word, you'd be able to distinguish which noun is the subject. And using that fifth word, you'd be able to distinguish which noun is the object, like ne and ko in Urdu. So that's how they do it. And the English people have their own method of doing it, and that's by keeping the sequence rigid. So the noun that's at the very front would be the subject, and the noun that's at the very end would be the object. So let's take examples of both of those, right? So in Urdu, they say something like Zayd ne Amar ko mara. Mara means hit, and obviously for the purpose of this illustration, you don't need to know Urdu. I'm just showing you that this is how one language does it, and clearly you can see spaces. You can see Zayd, you can see ne, Amr, ko, and mara. There's 5 words there. Now Zayd is an individual name of an individual. Amr is the name of another individual. Mara means hit, and ne is an extra word, ko is an extra word. So in this sentence, Zayd is the subject, and the ne told us that. Amr is the object, and the ko told us that. And the translation is Zayd hit Amr. Okay, and these are extra words, and their sole purpose was to distinguish between the subject and the object. So you have to use 5 words. But the benefit is that you can now move it around. And you can say Amr, ko, Zayd ne, mara, and it still means Zayd hit Amr. But here the emphasis is on Amr. So the translation would be more like, it was Amr that Zayd hit. If you say Amr, ko, Zayd ne, mara, it was Amr, so the stress is on Amr. Because the audience might already know that the hitting happened, and the audience might already know that it was Zayd that did the hitting, and the new piece of information you're communicating is that it was Amr that Zayd hit, so you want to bring that at the beginning because it's the main benefit of the sentence, right? So this allows flexibility in the order. Okay, so the sequence is not rigid. You can arrange that in pretty much 6 different ways. Okay, Zayd ne Amr ko, or you could say Amr ko Zayd ne, or you could bring Mara at the front and then create more possibilities based on that. Okay, but the drawback is that you need 5 total words. Okay, the English people have their own method, and that's the SVO method, where the subject is at the very front, the verb will be in the middle, and the object will be at the end. And the example is the same example, Zayd hit Amr. And English specifies the order of the words. So if you try to switch that around and change the order, then it alters the meaning. And now the one you want it to be the subject becomes the object, and the one you want it to be the object becomes the subject, and the meaning changes. Or if you change it in some other method and bring the verb at the front, then it becomes meaningless. So basically, there's only one way of communicating it, right? Which is a drawback, because you want more than one way to communicate a meaning so that you can create a better match with the audience, because the audience might be aware already. So you have to assess their level of awareness and speak accordingly, right? So Arabic has their own method, which is the use of single vowels at the end. So you'd have to have the word that means hit, which is daraba, and then you'd have to have your 2 nouns. And now literally you can arrange those nouns in 6 different ways. There's 6 ways of saying Zayd hit Amr. Daraba Zaydun Amran, Zayd hit Amr. Daraba Amran Zaydun also means Zayd hit Amr. They all mean Zayd hit Amr, that's the point. They all mean the same thing. So everything else being equal, you'd use the one in the top right corner, Daraba Zaydun Amran. Okay, Zayd hit Amr, and you wouldn't deviate away from that. But if your audience is already aware of the hitting, and they already know that Zayd did the hitting, then it wouldn't be appropriate to use the top structure. You'd use this one. You'd use the one that's circled in red, Amran, Daraba Zaydun. So to have all of these methods available is good, because it allows you to create a better match. So you're able to customize the sentence to satisfy the requirement of the occasion. And this is one of the factors, amongst many, many other factors, that make the Quran miraculous. Because when you have a verb in 2 nouns, there's 6 ways. If you add to that an adverb, the number jumps to 24. Now there's 24 possible ways of formatting it. If the sentence has 4 total parts, you add one more, it becomes 120. Because 1 times 2 times 3 is 6, times 4 is like what? 24 times 5 is 120. So now we have a very large amount of ways that we can communicate meaning. So when the Quran uses the most precise one at each and every occasion, then this gets noticed. And this is what dumbfounded the pre-Islamic Arab, and they couldn't understand it because it was so accurate at every occasion. And that's just one factor. There's other factors, like grammar will tell you that in a nominal sentence, example, it's not on the slide, but just listen, pay attention, that in a nominal sentence, the subject needs to be definite. Okay, but it doesn't specify what kind of definite. So you can say the person's name, or you can use an al and say the tribe. You can say the tribe of Shu'aib. The tribe of Shu'aib were losers. Or you can just say whatever, Ashabul Aika, or whatever the name of that tribe is, say were losers. Or you could do it the way the Quran does it, الَّذِينَ كَذَّبُوا شُعَيْبًا كَانُوا هُمُ الْخَاسِرِينَ. Those who rejected Shu'aib were the losers. So using that elaborate الَّذِينَ كَذَّبُوا شُعَيْبًا structure, that's a lot of words there, it gives you more benefit than saying the tribe of Shu'aib were losers. Because now we have a verb within that clause, the rejection verb. الَّذِينَ كَذَّبُوا شُعَيْبًا. كَذَّبُوا means rejected. Those that rejected Shu'aib were the losers. So the reason they suffered the loss was their rejection of Shu'aib. So it gives you that additional benefit without having to use 2 sentences. You don't have to use 2 sentences. So there's a lot of factors here, and this ability to be able to arrange the words in different ways is an asset. And what allowed that was the special method that the Arab people have for differentiating between the roles of the nouns. What Ibn Khaldun is saying is that the method the Arab people developed to determine grammatical meanings is by far the most superior system, because it doesn't require extra words, and yet the speaker is able to move the words around, which allows for communicating the meaning in 6x more ways, basically 6 times more ways, because of this factor alone. And when you add to that the other factors, then your number becomes very large. Okay, and this system of differentiating between the roles, or you can say the non-words, the mechanism that governs the conveyance of non-word meanings, translates to roughly 4% of all the rules. And if you can master just them, you'll have over half the benefits you will ultimately achieve. And you could, and this is not just achievable. Okay, I mean, it is achievable. We do it all the time with students. Within 3 weeks, we give them this system that governs the conveyance of non-word meanings, right? Differentiating between the roles of the nouns, and then the pattern related system. And when you connect words together and combine words together, the meanings that come from the grammatical structures, more on which will continue to develop throughout this presentation. All of that together translates to roughly 4% of all the rules. So it's like if you have a 200-page book, we're talking about 8 pages, which is not a lot. 8 pages from a 200-page book. So when you master this, then you're able to start the book. You have half of all the benefits you will ultimately achieve. Okay, now not only that, but it is my contention that this is the only proper way to study classical Arabic, because if you ignore this system, then there's a very large amount of negative effects that result from that. Okay, so here's what happens when you ignore the system. Arabic ends up getting taught as a series of disconnected rules, an endless list of vocabulary. So you're being taught rules, and you don't understand why they're important, and you don't understand what they really mean, and you have no earthly idea how these rules will ever lead you. So it's intimidating. I mean, it's overwhelming, and you get the sense that it's going to take ages to master, and it's just like there's no relative importance, and there's no big picture to tie any of this to. And the teachers, they feel that the students aren't ready to tackle the complex topics, so even the teachers are pulling their punches, and they're starting with the basics again and again. And it's like they're silently communicating to the student that you're not very intelligent, and it's going to take time, and we have to keep doing this pronouns and this hada baytun and dhalika masjidun and these things, and there's really no other way. So all of this is necessary. None of it's necessary. Okay, and it's a surefire way to kill the enthusiasm of the student. Okay, and it's a direct result of ignoring the system. Okay, not appreciating the fact that Arabic is different, and not appreciating the fact that within Arabic the majority of meanings are not coming from words, they're coming from vowels, patterns, and grammatical structure. So when you ignore this, Arabic ends up getting taught as a series of disconnected rules and an endless list of vocabulary, and you start thinking that it's going to take ages to master, and it involves a great deal of memorization. And the students, they're not understanding the importance, they're getting intimidated, and the teachers are pulling their punches, and they're not willing. First of all, they don't understand the importance. The teachers, unfortunately, they don't understand the importance, and they don't really get it. Or if they do get it, they can't present it. Okay, they don't have that skill to be able to piece it together and efficiently communicate it in a way that makes sense, right? And what that does is it hinders progress, and it delays the results unnecessarily. Okay, and then what happens is that the student is confronted with a sentence or maybe a verse of the Quran, and there's like 10 words. And they know individually the meaning of every single word, and yet they still can't translate it. Why not? Now you know. Now you know. The reason is because the majority of meanings are not coming from the words anyways. So if you know the 10 words, there's no guarantee that you'll be able to translate the sentence. Rather, there's the high likelihood that you'll mistranslate it, even if you know the vocabulary. Right? Because if you can't appreciate the meanings that are coming from the patterns, and also the meanings that are coming from combining the words together, there's no way in the world you'll be able to translate that. Right? And then eventually what happens is that the students, they develop this belief that Arabic is the difficult language to learn. And it then contradicts what they hear from the scholars, because the scholars tell them Arabic is easy. And Allah said that we made the Quran easy. So if the Quran is in Arabic and the Quran is easy, then by default Arabic should also be easy. But then that just totally contradicts my experience. So how does that make any sense? So the whole problem is because the approach was wrong. The whole problem is that they were not focusing on the non-word meanings, and they started teaching the rules disconnected. Okay, with no rhythm, with no rhyme, with no relative importance, no sequencing. And this belief is developed, and then the more classes you attend, the more homework you do, the more courses you sign up for, it just reinforces that belief, and it becomes like a vicious cycle, and it just keeps continuing. Right? Furthermore, attendance dwindles and the classes cancel out. And you've seen this, and you know what I'm talking about. Because it's not motivating. Because the teaching is not happening in a way that feeds the enthusiasm of the student and encourages their natural desire to learn. So of course the student will be discouraged. Of course the student will lose their motivation. And then when they stop attending, then what happens is that nobody understands why. Okay, and the teacher thinks he's done all the right things, and they get frustrated. Okay, so the students are frustrated, the teachers are also frustrated. And why would you want to study in that environment, right? And there's disappointed at lack of results. All the effort is being putting in, but the point is that effort does not equal results. There's no guarantee that if you put in 10 hours of effort, you will get 10 hours worth of results. That's not how there's no A for effort. Okay, it's like you have to be spending your time on the correct things, and you have to be learning the rules that matter the most, and suppressing and ignoring and ruthlessly avoiding everything else. And then that leads to insecurity of ever being able to master the language, and you start thinking that you're a poor learner and there's something wrong with you, right? And then you move from textbook to textbook and from teacher to teacher without gaining any traction, and I can go on and on. So these are all negative effects. So basically, bottom line is that the single biggest cause for failure among struggling Arabic students is trying to learn the language from the simple to the complex. From the simple to the complex, which upon first glance we would think that is the proper approach, but it's totally the wrong approach. And all it does is it results in Arabic being taught as a series of disconnected rules and long list of vocabulary, right? The fastest and most result certain way to master the language is to lead with the complex by first gaining a big picture overview of how the language works. That is to say, by focusing on the mechanism that governs the conveyance of non-word meanings. So if you want to learn in a way that fascinates you, so every new principle, every new rule you learn, it gives you an aha, and it gives you an epiphany, and it thrills you, and it excites you, and it remotivates you. And you want to gain incredible speed and unstoppable momentum, and you want to enable reading by the third week of class and get a very quick payoff, almost instantly. And you want to replace overwhelm with excitement and restore confidence, and move forward with no more than a 60-70% understanding. And let me tell you, this is probably the most important bullet point, that this method allows you to move forward. It allows you to move forward with no more than a 60-70% understanding. In other words, good enough is good enough. Good enough is good enough. Okay, and just don't take my word for it. Here's Sister Saliha from Manchester. She says, I have found it to be very true that you don't need to worry about not understanding everything the first time it is covered, as concepts are covered over and over again throughout the Qasas book, and that's the Stories of the Prophets book. She says that slowly but surely everything starts to fall into place. I love the fact that we are learning grammar whilst actually translating a book, so the grammar isn't just theory but comes to life. Isn't that what I've just been telling you for the last 5 minutes? And vocabulary built organically. Okay, so you're not sitting with long lists of words, and you don't need flashcards. Okay, but you're reading an actual book, and the author is creating sentences. It's a story that you're familiar with, the story of Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam, the story of the Prophet Yusuf alayhi salatu wasalam. You're reading these stories, and he's quoting verses of the Qur'an, and he's gradually using new words. You see, and then you're being taught the book. So it's guided reading. It's not just reading, it's guided reading by a teacher. And basically the vocabulary is building organically. And since you know the meanings that are coming from patterns, we're teaching you that separately, the pattern-related meanings, the pattern associated to the past tense verb, the pattern associated to the present future verb, the pattern associated to the command verb, active, passive, affirmative, negative, and then enhanced paradigms. All of that is being taught to you separately, and you're reading a book. So everything you're learning here is coming to life here, and every new word you're gaining into your vocabulary, you're not just gaining a word, you're gaining an entire family of words. And here's Sister Faryal, here's what she says. She says the best thing about the program was the fact that the same concept was repeated so many times that it just settled in the brain. The same was with the vocabulary because of the repetitive usage of it. I just learned it with minimal effort, alhamdulillah. Totally, so if you want to totally put an end to unnecessary homework, pointless exercises, and tedious memorization, and develop deep thought, and train your mind to think at the level of the scholars. And this is by providing reasoning. So when a new concept is introduced, we immediately tie it into the big picture, the framework, so you know how it fits in, and you know how it's important, and how it contributes to the understanding you already have. You see? So it's like taking the grammar principle and turning it into a solution for a problem. So we'd create a problem and say that this issue needs to be resolved, so here's how grammar resolves it. You see? So by this method, what happens is it trains your mind to think deeply and analytically. And this is what we mean when we say think at the level of scholars. And really, you can't understand Imam al-Ghazali. There's no way. Even an English translation of Imam al-Ghazali, you wouldn't be able to understand it if you don't have this aptitude, if you don't have this ability to think at the level of the scholars. And that's what that 132-page book does. By the end of that book, the students are fully equipped to study high-level books in tafsir and hadith commentary. Okay, and finally be impacted by the verses of the Quran, like the pre-Islamic Arab was impacted, like the Bedouin. He fell off the camel and he's prostrating, and they said, "What are you doing?" And he's saying, "I'm prostrating to these verses." Because it is the special use of the language within the Quran that makes it miraculous. Allah says in Hud, أَفَمَنْ كَانَ عَلَى بَيِّنَةٍ مِّن رَبِّهِ وَيَأْتُوهُ شَاهِدٌ مِّنْهُ, that can the rejecter of the Quran ever be equal to the one who is upon evidence from his Lord? And to it is attached its own internal witness. وَيَتْلُوهُ شَاهِدٌ مِّنْهُ. Shahid means witness. So there's what does that mean? That means that there's something that testifies to the Quran being the word of Allah, and that testimony is built into the Quran. It's an internal witness, not something from there's something from outside as well, and that's the previous scripture. وَمِن قَبْلِهِ كِتَابُ مُوسَى. The verse continues, وَمِن قَبْلِهِ كِتَابُ مُوسَى إِمَامًا وَرَحْمَةً. And prior to it was the book of Musa, which was a guide and a mercy for the people of that time. So the Torah, the Old Testament, the New Testament, these previous scriptures are prophesizing and speaking about the Quran. But that's not all. There's also a miracle built into the Quran, and that is the special use of the language within the Quran. So when you know the dynamics of how the language works, you don't just understand the basic message of the Quran. You can experience the miracle. You see that? And then it becomes the most pleasurable part of your day. If you want all these benefits that I just listed in the last two slides, you must lead with the complex. You must study these elaborate topics. You must speak about the parts of speech and the ism and how to differentiate between the roles of the ism. There's no way. There's no other way. You need to know the mechanism. You need to know the process that is likened to human emotions and facial expressions. The grammatical stage process that I'll talk to you about in a few minutes from now. So you got to lead with the complex, and upon first glance, this is counterintuitive. We wouldn't expect it to work, but if you really think about it, you'll say, yeah, that makes a ton of sense. That makes a great deal of sense. Why wouldn't you want to start with the big picture up front, right? And this leverages the 80-20 principle, and this is huge. And I'll speak about that in a couple of slides. And most importantly, it's how the scholars learn over the centuries. So it's really, there's no magic to it. I mean, it's a feat of staggering genius on part of the medieval grammarians that they were able to do this. They were able to look into the language and identify a core and a central theme. A central theme. All I've done is I said teach that first. Okay, now is it possible to teach that first? Let's try. Okay, so we've tested it over 16 years and we've modified it, and we have this continuous feedback loop from the students where they tell us what we need to change. So if the concept isn't resonating, I can approach it from a different angle. Okay, at some point, I'll see the majority of people are getting it. And again, we're setting the bar very low. Like, you don't need 100% understanding. You only need 60-70% understanding in order to move forward with the next topic, right? And you get the entire big picture up front. And now every new detail that you learn, instead of overwhelming you, what it does is it creates an epiphany. And it motivates you to move forward. And the end result is that you end up learning 1,600% faster. Now, where did I get that number from, 1,600? It's from the 80-20 principle. It's just a simple math. Okay, so let's look into what is it exactly that makes this so powerful. So this is the 80-20 principle. I mean, I've talked about it before, and you've probably read about it, and you know it. It's well known. But I would implore you, and I would encourage you to listen very carefully, because just knowing something and actually leveraging it is two different things. Okay, so what is 80-20? It says that there's a major imbalance between inputs and outputs, and there's an imbalance between causes and effects, and there's an imbalance between effort and results. So when two people are putting in an amount of effort, there's no guarantee that both of them will receive the same amount of results. It depends on what they're doing. It depends on the things that they're spending their time on. So it's possible that there's one person that puts in an hour in effort and gets results equivalent to the other person's 5 hours or 6 hours or 16 hours of effort. Right? So hardly ever will the inputs and the outputs equal. The causes and the effects, that hardly ever happens. Okay, most of the time what you see a massive imbalance, and this is true everywhere. It's pervasive in all facets of life, and everywhere you look, you'll see it. So like, for example, if you look at your happiness, you'll notice that there's 20% of your friends that give you 80% of your happiness. So you probably have a great deal of friends that they're not contributing a lot. So you might want to even reconsider whether they're worth keeping as friends or not. And then there's 20% of your clothes. If you go into your closet and survey your wardrobe, you'll notice that there's 20% of clothes that you're probably wearing 80% of the time. Isn't that true? Okay, like in carpets, it's the same deal. Like in office buildings, they figured this out. Somebody figured it out. And now they have modular carpeting. So they don't remove the whole carpet when they need to. They just take out the area that gets the wear and tear, and they leave the rest the way it is, and they replace just that area that gets the wear and tear, the 20%, that receives 80% of the wear and tear. If you go to any major city and survey the traffic, you'll notice that there's 20% of roads that receive 80% of the traffic. And the Arabic language is no different. It has a core and it has a central theme that must be taught first. And this translates to roughly 20% of all the rules in the three sciences of grammar, which is nahu, sarf, morphology, and the third one is balagha, which is rhetoric. So grammar, it teaches you about the parts of speech and how to arrange them together to create meaningful sentences. And it teaches you about how to differentiate between the roles of the nouns. In a nutshell, that's what grammar is. Sarf is the science of classical Arabic that speaks about consonants being voweled on particular patterns to create tense and voice. And you will hear that definition nowhere else. Okay, that's exactly what it is. That's what sarf is. It's the science of classical Arabic that teaches you about how consonants are to be voweled on particular patterns to create tense and voice. And then the third area is rhetoric, which is the most noble and the most virtuous, noble, exalted, but it's not the most important. The most important is grammar. So what rhetoric does is it teaches you how to match with the requirement of the occasion. So when you know grammar and you know all the structures that are valid, it's the question now is which one to use where. So rhetoric will tell you that, here are the occasions where it's more appropriate to have the subject in the form of the person's name, proper noun. And here are the occasions where it's more appropriate to use a pronoun, or more appropriate to use a hadha kind of demonstrative pronoun, more appropriate to use the alladhina kadhabu shu'ayban format, where we have the relative pronoun starting the sentence. Like, why would you want to do that? You see? And what are the benefits of bringing something that should have been delayed first? So they'll say that's done for confinement and restriction, or they'll say that that's done for stress, or it's done for emphasis, or whatever the reason is behind that, right? So that's rhetoric. So there's 20% of rules in all three sciences that give you 80% of all of your benefits. And these are the fundamentals of the language that have the broadest application by far. So what we do now is we reapply the rule within the 20%, and we come up with a further 20%, which is 4, because 20% of 20 is 4. Look at the graphic. It's not complicated at all. Look that the blue has been shaded, and you have the darker blue, and that darker blue is leading to the darker green. You see? So 20% will take time, but 4% you can do it in 3 weeks. It's very manageable. And you're not going to get 80, but you'll get 64, because 80% of 80 is 64. So if you're spending your time learning just that 4, you're actually progressing 250 times faster. And 1600%, 1600% was actually an understatement. Okay, if you're focusing on 20%, then you're getting the top 20%, then you're getting 16 times more benefits than the person that's focusing on the last 20%. Okay, so that's 16 times faster. So if you're going more dense, and you reapply the rule the way we do, then that number is staggering. Like 1600% doesn't do justice. Okay, but if I lead it with that, then people would tune out. They say this person is blowing air up my skirt, and whatever the expression is. Okay, but all of this is manageable. All of this is attainable, but you got to follow the proper approach. Okay, so there is an even denser 4% of the language that if you know it, it will give you over half of all of your benefits. And these are the aspects of the language that you would expect to encounter in practically every sentence. Grammatical structures is the way in which the words are combined together. Okay, and there's a very manageable number of ways, valid, sanctioned by the language, wherein words can be connected together. Okay, what is that number? It's maybe 20, 22, max. And from those, there's some result in sentences, and most of them result in phrases. And based on my surveying, the phrases are 16. 16 phrases, 16 ways that words can be connected together to create what we call phrases. What's common between all sanctioned methods of joining words together is that you always get more than what you started off with. Okay, and what's also common is that every method has requirements that need to be satisfied. Now here, there's an example on the next slide, and this is going to make total sense. Look at the example. There's two examples. On the left side, it says Kitabu Zaydin, which translates to Zayd's book. The one beside that is Waladun Tawilun, that translates to tall boy. Now both of these are phrases. Okay, and the total meanings in each of them is not 2. The words are 2. Kitab Zayd is 2 words, but the total meanings are 3. Because we have the meaning of book, which is coming from the word kitab, and then we have the meaning of Zayd, which is the name of an individual, and then there's a third meaning, which is the ownership and possession. So where did that come from? Where did the ownership and possession come from? The answer is it came from the particular way in which the two nouns were connected, in that the first noun, the word kitab, is empty of al. There's no al. It's not al-kitab, it's just kitab. And also, there's no tanween. So there's no second vowel on the ba, and it's just a single dhamma. And thirdly, Zayd has a particular ending, Zaydin, as opposed to any other ending that was possible. So when these three requirements, the ones I just mentioned, the absence of al, the absence of the second dhamma, and Zayd having a particular ending, when all three of those get together, it can only get together here, and that's the point. The other 16 would be different. The other 16 would be different. Then the fulfillment of these requirements gives you a third meaning above and beyond the meaning of book and Zayd, and that third meaning is possession. So if they ask you where did it come from, the correct answer is it came from the structure. In here, in the waladun tawilun, in the second example, we have two nouns. We have the noun at the front, we have the adjective delayed, and the translation is tall boy. So there's the meaning of boy, there's the meaning of tall, and then there's the description. So where did the description come from? It came from satisfying the requirements of this type of phrase, and that is correspondence. In that they're both masculine, they're both singular, they're both indefinite, and like that. So if there's 16 ways words can be connected, they all have requirements. Very, very manageable. And the point is that from the 16, there's only two that you need to learn now. And I just gave you a broad overview of them right now. I didn't teach you everything you need to know about them, but I gave you a good understanding because I don't want to bog you down. So these two, there's 14 others. So how about the other 14? When do we get those? The answer is that after the book starts, after the book begins, and the author of the book is using them, and he's bringing the newer structures in the book. At that point, we have it in front of us. So we need to address it, but you don't need to know that now. You see, you can wait until it actually occurs. And even then, when it occurs 2 or 3 times, it's the judgment call. It's a judgment call on part of the teacher whether he wants to talk about it or not. And the student needs to be patient. And the student can't be asking questions about something that is intentionally being suppressed. Because like you saw in the video earlier, the professor, one of our students, he said in pedagogy, they tell us that it's more important to know what not to teach. It's just as important as to know what to teach. So you got to be able to suppress and certain things and bring them back at appropriate times, and this is exactly what we do, right? Continuing forward. Okay, so that's the meanings that come from the grammatical structures, and then there's meanings that come from patterns, and this is verb related. And we talked about this earlier, that there's 28 letters in the alphabet, and you can see them there in the screen. The ba is the equivalent of a b, the ta is the equivalent of a t, the jim is the equivalent of a j, and like that you can run through the whole alphabet, and what you'll notice is that they're all consonants. Okay, and the vowels are there, but they're not in the alphabet. They're added on top and beneath the consonants to collectively give us the sounds of A, E, I, O, U. And the words are constructed by taking the letters and putting them into groups of 3. Every group of 3 has an associated meaning. So Nun, Sad, Ra, together, when they're combined, they give us the meaning of helping. Jim, Lam, and Sin, when those 3 letters are isolated, they give us the meaning of sitting. But the consonants on their own, they're not pronounceable. So if you take kaf, ta, and ba and try to pronounce it, you wouldn't be able to. Try to do it. Okay, you can, right? So we need vowels. So the vowels, they come to number 1, make the letters pronounceable, and number 2, they give you more meaning. More specifically, they give you the tense and the voice, and we'll see this, we'll highlight this on the next slide using our particular example, which is the istansaru example. So what you're seeing on the slide is, it looks like a single word, but it's actually a full sentence, and in English it translates to they sought help, and specific group of males. They, group of males, sought help. So how many meanings are there? Is it 3 meanings? Like the English people need 3 words to communicate it. They sought help, but the actual meanings are more than 3. It's a large number. Okay, so let's dissect this, and let's dive in. So they sought help. So the first meaning there is the help. Where is that coming from? That's coming from the particularness of the 3 consonants used in the middle, Nun, Sad, and Ra. Because if I leave everything else the way it is, and I switch those 3 letters, and I put Ta, Ain, and Mim, which are the 3 letters of food, then the translation changes, and instead of they sought help, it becomes they sought food. What does it become? They sought food. Istat'amu. Notice how it rhymes. So clearly the help is coming from the particularness of the 3 consonants in the middle. The second meaning would be the notion of seeking, and that's coming from the sin and the ta at the front. Okay, because if I remove that sin and the ta and I say only nasaru, then the translation is they helped. So the they part stays the same, the help part's still there,
and the seeking disappears. So where's that coming from? That's coming from the sin and the ta. And there's the hamza at the front. The e, it's not circled, and it's there to enable pronunciation. And for the sake of time, I'm going to leave that. I'm not going to speak a lot about that hamza. Next meaning, there's the past tense. Because what we have on the screen translates to they sought help. It could have been they are seeking help. It could have been they will seek help. But it's not. It's particularly they sought help. So where's this past tense coming from? The answer to that is that it's coming from not having the particular prefix that the present future verb requires. So the present future verb, which is the other one, not this one, the other one, has a particular requirement, and that is not being satisfied here. So the verb on the screen cannot be a present future tense verb because it doesn't have the letter at the front that verb needed to have. Now, what is that letter? Totally irrelevant for our purposes right now because we're not teaching these topics. We're highlighting comprehensiveness at the word level, right? So it's a letter that needed to be that the front is not there. And number two, the sad has a fatha, which is relevant because if the sad had a different vowel, then it would have been a command verb. Istansiru means seek help when you're speaking to a group of males. Istansaru means they sought help. Radically different translation. All that changed was a single vowel. Okay? And then the fourth meaning is the active voice, and that's coming from pure vowels. Okay, not just one vowel, but actually the combination of three vowels. Because what we have is istansaru, the translation is they sought help. If it was three other vowels, a different configuration, then everything else would be the same. The translation would become help was sought from them. Help was sought from them. And again, I don't need to tell you exactly what that configuration for the passive is. The point is that what we have is different from that one. It's different from that one. And the topic would be taught at a more appropriate time, right? Continuing forward, the next meanings are the masculine gender. Now we're moving to the they. So the they is not one meaning, it's actually three meanings because it's men. Because if it was women, I'd do it differently. I'd have a different way of doing it. And then it's plural. So in other words, it's a group of males. And not only that, but we're talking about them. So we're not saying you sought help when speaking to an audience, a group of males. We're not saying we, assuming that we're males, sought help, because there's other ways of doing those. You see, so this is masculine, this is plural, and this is third person. So count up all of those meanings, there's 7 meanings. Let's recap very quickly. Meaning number 1 was the help, and that's coming from the particularness of the nun sadra. Meaning number 2 was the notion of seeking, and that's coming from the sin and the ta at the front. Meaning number 3 was the past tense, and that's coming from the absence of the letter that needed to be there at the front in order to indicate present future as well as the fatha on the sad. And the fourth meaning was the active voice, and that's coming from pure vowels, because the passive would have a different configuration of vowels. And the meanings 5, 6, and 7 are coming from the wow. Right? So they sought help. Now the English people, they tried to do it. Okay, and they couldn't do it. So what you're seeing here is mind-blowing. It's the height of comprehensiveness. And the English people, they tried to do it and they couldn't do it. And they needed 3 words. And even then, it wasn't precise because they in English does not distinguish between males and females, whereas our one is clearly males, because if it was females, I would have done it differently.
So this is what the Prophet ﷺ meant when he said in a famous hadith, أُعْتِيتُ جَوَامِعَ الْكَلِمِ, I was given words of great comprehensive meaning. وَاخْتُصِرَ لِيَ الْكَلَامُ اخْتِصَارًا, and speech was made concise for me. So he's talking about his own God-given talent and his aptitude and his ability, because he was more eloquent than everyone. But he's also talking about the language, because the language has these things built into it. And when you learn this, you end up learning more in a single day than others might have learned an entire year of study. Like one sister, she drove 22 hours from Mississippi to attend my live class, and she posted on the Al-Maghrib forums, and I'll flash her screenshot on the screen so you can see that this is real. The Al-Maghrib forums are no longer active, but I had to go to the Wayback Machine and archive.org to pull out this screenshot, and you can read it yourself. She's saying essentially, somebody's asking her about a particular textbook series, whether it's effective or not, and she responds and she says, no, what you need in a class is someone to explain to you how the language works. And when you learn this, because of these things, I ended up learning more in one day than an entire year of Harvard. So if you like this material, and if you can see how this will work for you, then I encourage you to look underneath this video, and you can get on the early bird list because we have a premium program that we've been teaching for over 20 years now. And those classes are in session, uninterrupted, and there's about 6,000 to 7,000 students that have gone through this system. And if you want to also join, then you can get on the early bird list. and we'll tell you more about the program. But if not, then that's totally cool, because I have a lot more for you. Together, all of these videos will give you over half of all of your benefits. Okay, so I look forward to speaking with you in the next video. Before moving to the second of the 4 presentations that were originally in the workshop, I'm going to add 2 more lessons in between. So we can call that previous video 1, we can call that module 1. So module 2 is developing the 3 parts of speech. Because if you've studied Arabic for any length of time, then undoubtedly you've come across the terms ism, fi'l, and harf. So we want to develop them, and we want a crystal clear understanding of what the ism is, the fi'l is, and the harf is. And undoubtedly you've studied these things before, but there's a particular way in which they're presented, and I want you to pay attention to the way I develop them. And by the end of it, you will have such a clear understanding of what these 3 are that you'll be able to turn around and teach it to someone else, inshallah. And then after that, the next module would be a verse of the Qur'an. I'm going to bring a verse of the Qur'an and show how knowledge of grammar is what enables proper understanding. And this is how you'll be able to appreciate the verses and the arguments and what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying within the verse. So essentially, it's as if the Qur'an is teaching us how to study Arabic. It's not by focusing on vocabulary. It's by understanding the feature and function of these particles. So first you have to know what a particle is, and then I'll give you a verse in which there's 2 particles, harfs, that knowing their feature and function and knowing their meaning contributes to a mind-blowing understanding. So inshallah, these 2 videos, and then after that we'll move on to the 2 core issues, which is the nominal sentence and the verbal sentence, developing them and reducing the entire language into just 2 issues that have a solution, and the solution could be summarized in a single sentence. And if you know what they are, then that's all of grammar. So it gives you focus, because either what you're covering relates to problem A or it relates to problem B, so you can quickly appreciate and understand whether you're spending your time on the most productive things. Okay, so let's move to the 3 parts of speech, and I'll continue speaking with you there. If you've been studying Arabic for any length of time, then undoubtedly you come across the 3 terms, ism, fi'l, and harf. Ism is generally translated as noun, the fi'l is referred to as verb, and the harf, they call it a particle. So exactly what are these, and how do they correspond to the parts of speech that we know in English? That's the topic of this presentation.
So we want to develop them, and we want a very clear, crystal clear understanding of what these 3 are. Okay, because when people speak, they speak in sentences, and sentences are made up of phrases, and phrases are made up of words. So you got to know the word. And luckily, there's only 3 of them. In English, there's more. There's like 8 plus parts of speech in English. So if we wanted to talk about these and give definitions, we wouldn't start with that. What we do is we revisit the ones we know in English. Okay, and we line them up and spend a few minutes on those. Okay, so if you're not familiar with the English parts of speech, that's fine, because we'll spend 2-3 minutes, because this is more productive than directly trying to define the ism, the fi'l, and the harf, as you'll see. So we have nouns, pronouns, adjectives, and adverbs. So very briefly, what are they? So a noun is the part of speech which is like entities, places, people, things, objects, concepts. Pronouns are smaller words that are used in place of the noun when the noun has already been mentioned. Okay, and there's various kinds of pronouns like he, she, they, you, which we call personal pronouns. And then there's pronouns that are used to introduce questions like who and what, and they're called interrogative pronouns. And then there's other pronouns that create conditional statements like whoever comes to you, honor him. So we call them conditional pronouns. So bottom line is that the second part of speech is pronouns. We have noun, which is place, person, thing, and then we have pronoun, smaller words used in place of nouns when the nouns have already been referenced. And there's various kinds of those. And then the next one, the third one, is adjective, which is a part of speech which modifies a noun. And an adverb is the part of speech which modifies other than a noun. So examples of adjectives would be tall, small, ugly, beautiful. And examples of adverb would be like quickly, such as in came quickly. The verb is the part of speech which is action plus tense. So something happening in the past, something happening now, or something is yet to happen and will happen in the future. So like hit, helps, is helping, helped, are all examples of verbs. Okay, now the next 3 parts of speech are prepositions, conjunctions, and articles, and that's it. There's only 8. And if there's more, then it doesn't really matter, because our point right now is not to exhaust English grammar, but we're using this as a bridge, and we're using this to facilitate our understanding of the Arabic parts of speech. Okay, because what we're going to do right now is going to blow your mind. Okay, so we have our 3 parts of speech. Prepositions. What is a preposition? A preposition is a part of speech in English that brings out an attribute of an upcoming word, such as the word from, or like the word to, T-O. So to indicates destination, and from indicates origin. So when you line up the word from with an upcoming word and you say something like, I traveled from Basra to Kufa. I traveled from Basra to Kufa. Basra is the name of a city and Kufa is the name of another city. So what the word from did is it told us that Basra is the origin of the travel. And if you take away the from and you say only I traveled Basra, then the meaning changes because it doesn't have to be origin anymore. But rather I traveled Basra, it means I took a tour. You see? So it's incredibly important, the word from. It told us something about Basra that otherwise we would not have been able to understand. Okay, and another example is the word with. That's a preposition also, and it indicates that the upcoming noun is a tool. So I wrote with the pen is telling us that the pen was the tool for the writing, right? And then our next part of speech is conjunction. And these again are small little words that are used to gather between or combine between nouns and verbs, and they allow abbreviation, so you don't have to repeat yourself, and you don't have to say the thing twice. So you say something like Zaid and Amr came. So instead of having to say Zaid came, period, capital letter, Amr came, so there's no need to say came twice. Just use the word and now we have Zaid and Amr both gathered together in being the subject of the verb came, right? And then there's various examples of conjunctions, which we'll give to you on the upcoming slides. Or and not are further examples of conjunctions. So or is telling us that one of the two came without being specific which one. Not is telling us that the earlier is established and the upcoming is negated. So coming is established for Zaid and simultaneously negated from Amr. So affirmation of the first, negation of the second. That's what not does. Zaid came, not Amr. Again, conjunctions, however many there are, what they all have in common is that they're used to combine between nouns and verbs while allowing for abbreviation, so you don't have to repeat yourself and say the verb twice, for example. And then we have the article, which there's only two of them in the entire language. The definite article, which is the word the, which suggests something particular, such as in the pen. And then we have the indefinite article, a, like in the example, a pen, which tells us any of many. Okay, so now our 8 parts of speech, again, are nouns, pronouns, adjectives, and adverbs. And very quickly, noun is the part of speech which indicates on place, person, thing. Pronoun is a smaller word that's used in place of a noun when the noun has already been mentioned. Adjective is the part of speech that modifies a noun. Adverb is the part of speech which modifies other than a noun. And a verb is action plus tense. Prepositions are small little words that tell us attributes about the upcoming words that otherwise cannot be understood, such as from and to. From indicates origin, and to indicates destination. Conjunctions are parts of speech in English that facilitate combining between nouns and verbs without having to repeat yourself. And then we have the article, which are only 2 in the entire language: the definite article the and the indefinite article a. So what we do now is we take our ism, fi'l, and harf and we line them up with these 8. And we say ism corresponds to the top 4. Okay, so an ism doesn't mean just noun. It means nouns, pronouns, adjectives, and adverbs. And a verb is exactly what we call fi'l. So what we call fi'l is exactly what the English people call verb. And then the last 3, and if there's any more, you can just add them to those bottom few, and they will all fall under our 3rd one, which is called harf. Okay, so now that we have a very good understanding of what ism, fi'l, and harf correspond to, it's time to give precise definitions for each of them. So in order to define, what we do is we spend a few minutes pondering on the commonalities and the differences. So harf doesn't just include one thing, it includes 3 things. It includes prepositions, conjunctions, and articles. So what we do now is we throw on the screen a whole bunch of prepositions, conjunctions, and articles without any particular order. We just throw them up there on the screen. A big mess, right? And then we'll look, what's common between all of them? Try to figure that out. What's the element that connects all of them? You see? And that would be the harf, wouldn't it? Okay, and if it doesn't have that, then automatically it has to be the other 2. And then we do the same thing with the other 2 and try to look for a difference there, that what distinguishes the verb from nouns, pronouns, adjectives, and adverbs, right? Okay, so we can start by throwing up some prepositions, conjunctions, and articles on the screen. So we have the word in, which is a preposition, indicates containment. And then this from, which is another preposition, to, with, and, which is an example of a conjunction, or, not, but. These are all examples of conjunctions. And then we have a, And I think that's enough. And the word the. So these are all examples of harf. Okay, if you want to go more broad, these are all examples of harf. Every one of them is a harf. Now, what do they have in common? Okay, so let's look at their meanings. So and suggests gathering. So when I use it in a sentence and I say Zayd and Amr came, so what and did is gathered Zayd and Amr together. Okay, or indicates disjunction, that it's one of the two that the ruling is applying to and not both. So it's one of the two without being specific which one. Not indicates affirmation of the first and negation of the second. So Zayd came, not Amr. So the coming is affirmed for Zayd and simultaneously is negated from Amr. In indicates containment, like the water is in the bottle or the water is in the cup. From suggests origin, and with indicates utility. So if you look at all of them, you'll have to agree that the commonality is that they all indicate meanings in something else. Okay, because origin is not an attribute of the from, it's an attribute of the upcoming word, the Basra word, from Basra. Okay, because if you remove it, then the meaning changes, and that's the element that disappears, and it becomes I took a tour, right? And they're all like that. They're all like that, right? Contrast that to the word tree, which would not be a harf, because tree is an example of a noun. So tree, what does that indicate? It indicates trunk, it indicates roots, it indicates branches and leaves, and maybe fruit. Okay, so all of those things, are they contained within the tree or are they contained outside the tree somewhere else? The answer is clearly it's the tree, which is the tree. It's the tree that possesses the trunk. It's the tree that has the roots. It's the tree that has the branches and the leaves and the fruits. So we have two elements here. We have indicating a meaning in something else versus indicate a meaning in itself. So if it indicates a meaning in something else, then that's the primary ingredient that makes a harf a harf. And indicate a meaning in itself would be the primary ingredient that makes the other ones whatever they are. And then since there's more of them, then there's something that's distinguishing the top four from the verb. And what is that? That's tense. Clearly, right? So the noun, the pronoun, the adjective, and the adverb indicate a meaning in themselves and are empty of tense, whereas the fi'l has tense. So now we're ready to give precise definitions. Okay, so here are the definitions. Ism is the part of speech in Arabic that indicates on a meaning in itself and is not linked to time. Right? And examples are Zayd, Shajara, which means tree, Qalam, which means pen, Ash-Shamsu, which means the sun, Al-Qamaru, which means the moon. Right? And fi'al is the part of speech in Arabic that indicates a meaning in itself and is also linked to time. And the examples are Daraba, Nasara, Sami'a, Akrama. Daraba means hit, Sami'a means heard, Nasara means helped, so helping in the past, Sami'a means heard, hearing in the past, Akrama means honored. Right? And istansara is another example which means sought help. Okay, our third part of speech is harf, and this is the part of speech in Arabic that does not indicate on a meaning in itself, but rather in something else. And the examples here are min, fi, wa, aw. Min means from, fi means in, wa means and aw means or. And that's it. That's the development of the parts of speech. So we did it by surfacing the English parts of speech, and then explaining them, spending a few minutes on them, and then immediately lining up the Arabic parts of speech with the English ones to try to get a feel and an understanding of what they correspond to. And then we look for the commonalities and the differences, which then led us to the definitions. And this topic is now totally done. It's totally done. It's done in a way that I don't think you'll forget it.
The three parts of speech is key. Like, you can't start anything. Even our other brothers that use a different approach to the way we're presenting the material here, and they say focus on vocabulary and learn a gazillion words, and do that first, and then delay the study of grammar. I don't think that they would suppress from the student the three parts of speech. Even they would feel that, the students need to know what an ism is, what a fi'l is, and what a harf is. So hopefully you found that valuable, like the way it was presented there, and you found it was presented in a way that should stick with you. So even if you needed to present it to someone else, you should be able to present it to someone else, because we took something you already knew and we used it as a bridge in order to get this knowledge of the three parts of speech, so you have a very precise understanding of what they are. Inshallah, in this video, I'm going to explain to you through the Qur'an that the way to learn Arabic, according to the Qur'an, is by not focusing on vocabulary. We've been talking about this. My last two videos, they did go viral, and one of them has over 10,000 views in 4 days. Okay, for a small channel like ours, that's a big deal. So something resonated, and I gave an example in my previous video of a particular structure that looked like a single word and was giving 7 meanings, and that was mind-blowing, and it was the height of comprehensiveness. But what I'm going to do in this presentation is give to you a verse of the Qur'an. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says in Surah Al-Ra'd, وَلَوْ أَنَّ قُرْآنًا سُيِّرَتْ بِهِ الْجِبَالُ أَوْ قُطِّعَتْ بِهِ الْأَرْضُ أَوْ كُلِّمَ بِهِ الْمَوْتَى بَلْ لِلَّهِ الْأَمْرُ جَمِيعًا. Had it been the case that the Qur'an, through it, mountains could be moved and large distances could be traversed very, very quickly, or dead people could be brought back to life and then spoken to, ... بَلْ لِلَّهِ الْأَمْرُ جَمِيعًا, rather all authority belongs to Allah. So that's the basic translation of the ayah. I just gave it to you. Now what does it mean? What is it saying? It doesn't make sense because the sentence is hypothetical. The word law is a particle in the Arabic language that introduces sentences. If then, if this was the case, had this been the case, comma, then this would have been the outcome. But it's not giving the jawab. It's not giving the second half of the conditional statement. So that's something that's missing. So we're going to have to fill that gap. And then it says, بَلْ لِلَّهِ الْأَمْرُ جَمِيعًا, rather all authority belongs to Allah. So the word bal is actually a conjunction that deflects attention away from a previous statement and refocuses that attention on something new. So, I mean, it's not very clear what the ayah is saying. So how do we make sense of this? So step number 1 is to look at the earlier verses and try to establish a context. So the scholars, they tell us that the Prophet ﷺ in Mecca, when he was presenting evidence, instead of appreciating the miracles, using their minds and pondering and reflecting, they would ask for ridiculous things. And they would say that if we had a Qur'an, that if we pointed at a mountain, the mountain would move. And if we had a Qur'an, that if we held it in our hands, and all of a sudden we would move at the speed of light. Or if we walked up to a grave, and the dead person would come to life, and we'd be able to speak to them, then these are the kinds of things we need. You know, how cool would that be? So unfortunately, you haven't been able to produce any of this, so therefore we can't accept you. So this is what the Prophet ﷺ was up against. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this ayah in Surah Al-Ra'd is comforting and consoling the Prophet ﷺ. So here's the translation. We'd add some extra words at the front to establish some context, but still we have to struggle with the loss of meaning. And that's the point of this video. That just knowing the words within the ayah is not enough. Like, for God's sake, try to understand that point. That just knowing the words is not enough. So I'm saying it's a tasalli verse. Okay? So that already gives you somewhat of an understanding of what the ayah is saying. So we'd add some extra words at the front and we'd say that, parentheses, instead of making the appreciation of the Quran's miracle dependent on tadabbur and dependent on pondering and reflecting, if we were to make it effortless. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that if we were to make it effortless, for example, if we were to reveal such a Quran that through it mountains could be moved, like you just hold it in your hand, point it at a mountain, and the mountain starts moving, or you start moving at the speed of light. If we were to reveal such a Quran that through it these 3 things can happen: mountains could be moved, large distances could be traversed very, very quickly, and dead people could be brought back to life and then spoken to, parentheses, they still would not believe. So that's the second half of the sentence. And this is in the tafsir of Jalalain. He says, لَمَا آمَنُوا, they still would not believe. And then it says, rather all authority belongs to Allah. So it's still not complete, because rather deflects attention away, so there's something missing there. So because the scholars, they tell us that bal in the Arabic language is for idrab, to deflect attention away from a previous statement and refocus that attention on something new. So this is something that the ancient Arabian understood this. So when they see that, and they see until dead people would be brought back to life and then spoken to, they realize that the second half of the law sentence is not there, so automatically they'd surface it. They'd surface it and they say, oh, they still would not believe. Like, if all of these things were granted, these requests that these mushriks are making, if all of those requests were granted, they still would not believe. Rather, all authority belongs to Allah. So what does that mean? That means that observing a miracle and seeing something extraordinary, something that breaks the normal cause and effect and the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala governs the universe in a scientifically coherent way. So if something like that were to happen, then we would expect that to lead to a person becoming a believer, right? Because it's a cause, and causes generally, naturally lead to their effects. But they only do that if Allah wills it. Okay, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that does absolutely everything, and the entire universe depends completely and utterly on the knowledge, will, and power of Allah. So there's no guarantee that a mushrik will view a miracle occurring before their eyes and automatically they'll become a Muslim. Not necessarily. It will only happen if Allah has willed for such a person to enter paradise. And guess what? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not grant guidance to people that are stubborn rejectors. And these mushriks were like that. They had inad, they had ta'annud, they had this obstinate nitpickiness, and they were not desiring the truth. And they even knew the truth. A lot of them, they knew it, but they were refusing the Prophet ﷺ because they were following false religion. And they had a pagan cult in Mecca, and they were benefiting from that financially. And if they were to become Muslim, then they would lose all of that power and prestige. So that's why they would come up with excuses and try to justify to themselves that the Prophet ﷺ is not a real, genuine prophet, even though they knew he was. You see? So what the verse is saying is that they still would not believe because observing a miracle is merely a cause that you would expect it to lead to its effect. But causes are never intrinsically effective. بَلْ لِلَّهِ الْأَمْرُ جَمِيعًا. Rather, all authority belongs to Allah. Allah is mu'athir haqiqi, and that concludes the verse. So if you appreciated that tafsir, what you will notice is that the first translation I started with, when you compare it with the final translation, where did all of those things come from? Some of it came from the books of tafsir. Okay, I have to admit, some of it came from the books of tafsir. Some of it came from the vocabulary. But the vocabulary is the least important part there. Can you appreciate that? The vocabulary is the least important part. It's the grammar. It's knowing the feature and function of law. And it's knowing the feature and function of bal. And then being able to surface the proper sentences in there in order to complete the translation. So if you like that style, and if you want to take yourself to a level, because what I just showed you there in that verse in Surah Al-Ra'd is pervasive. It's throughout the entire Quran. Like you'll see things like that on every single page within the Quran. But the first step is to learn the language. And from the sciences associated to the Arabic language, the most important is grammar. Ibn Khaldun, he says, أَهَمُّهَا النَّحْوُ. He said the most important of all of the sciences is grammar. إِذْ لَوْلَاهُ لَجُهِلَ أَصْلُ التَّفَاهُمْ. Because if you take away grammar, communication ceases to exist. Now we have some people, they make an argument and they say that if you don't have vocabulary, communication ceases to exist. But that's not what he's saying. Can you see that? That's not what he's saying. He said, أَهَمُّهَا النَّحْوُ. Because you wouldn't be able to differentiate between the roles of the nouns, and your listener would be completely confused. You see? Inshallah, in a minute, we're going to get to work, and we're going to get to work really quickly. First, let me tell you a little about who I am. People have been asking, like, what madrasa did you graduate from? Who are you? So my name is Yusufullah, and I first got started when I was a teenager. Back in the 1980s, my parents sent me to a madrasa, and I memorized the Qur'an. And I studied these topics, this sarf and nahu and the sciences of the Arabic language and fiqh and hadith and tafsir, these things in a madrasa in the UK. And I had some life experiences. I used to get in trouble, and I eventually got kicked out of that madrasa, and I went to a second madrasa. And alhamdulillah, I had some really great teachers, and that taught me these things really well. And then eventually I went to Karachi, and I graduated from Darul Uloom Karachi, and Mufti Taqi Usmani is my teacher. So while I was in Karachi, there was some older brothers that were enrolling into the madrasa from the UK, and they were like pharmacists, people with university degrees, and their study habits were already developed. So they would hear good things about the madrasa education. So they would come all excited with a lot of enthusiasm, but their situation would get far worse before it ever got better. And let me tell you what I mean by that. So these brothers, they were put in classes with 16-year-olds, and the teacher would be forced to teach at the level of the lowest common denominator, so these brothers would get frustrated. And it was so slow. And they would eventually quit. And when I saw that multiple times, it caused me a lot of pain. So I made a decision, and I said that after I graduate, I'm going to try to take these subjects and these topics and organize them and present them to people that caters to their work ethic and their study habits, people whose study habits are already developed, and people that cannot realistically enroll in a madrasa. And this is what I've been doing ever since. So alhamdulillah, the program has been in session since 2001. Okay, I started with 4 students in the basement of my house, and then that 4 became 40, and then eventually we went online in 2004. And at this stage right now, there's about 6,000 to 7,000 people that have gone through this system, have gone through this method. And alhamdulillah, the method is tested and it works, and I'm demonstrating this to you in these modules. So the presentation today is about the 2 core issues. That if you take all of Arabic, you can reduce it to 2 core issues that need to be understood. There's 2 problems, and each of those 2 problems has a solution, and the solution can be summarized in a single sentence. So if you know this, it gives you focus. So all of your effort can be channeled to solving one of those two problems. So let's move it over to the PowerPoint and I'll continue speaking with you there.
Okay, so the point of this video is just to keep you focused, just so that you know exactly what's the big concept, what's the core concept. We got to keep this in mind. So it starts off with that sentence that we led with, and I'll just remind you of that sentence. Here it is. In the Arabic language, the majority of meanings do not come from words. Instead, they come from, number one, vowels, number two, patterns, and number three, grammatical structures. So if you take a paragraph of sentences in Arabic and you want to translate it into any other language, you would need at least twice the amount of words, if not even more than that, if you were to do it properly, because the consonants are giving you separate meaning, and then the vowels are giving you separate meaning, and then on top of that, the way in which the words are arranged together is giving you even more meaning. So there's these three areas that we need to focus on. The meanings that are achieved from the vowels, the meanings that are achieved from the patterns, and finally the meanings that are achieved from grammatical structures. So patterns is sarf. Like the alphabet has 28 letters in it, they're all consonants, and meanings are achieved by grouping the consonants into groups of three. So if you were to take the alphabet and group it into groups of three, you'd have tens of thousands of groups. Every group of three consonants has an associated meaning, but then you're not able to pronounce them, because when people speak, they speak in syllables. Consonants on their own are not pronounceable. So the vowels come to, number one, remove the limitation and allow the letters to be spoken. Okay, and number two, it gives you more meaning, more specifically the tense and the voice, and this is highlighted through the istansaru example, right? When we say vowels in this context, what we mean is that the vowels at the end of the noun. So al-baytu versus al-bayta versus al-bayti, or zaydun versus zaydan. So at the end of the ism, there's a particular vowel that's differentiating between the role of the ism. In other languages, you might need separate words to do that. In Arabic, it's done through vowels. So those are the vowels we're talking about when we say vowels and patterns and grammatical structures. Grammatical structures is obviously the sanctioned methods and the ways in which the nouns could be combined together. So when you take two words and combine them together through one of the methods sanctioned by the language, then you always end up getting more than what you started off with. Okay, so that's phrases. Now, when we speak about sentences, which is the topic of this presentation, the first thing is, what's the definition of a sentence? So here's a very brief definition. It's not on the slide. It's basically when you take two or more words and you connect them together in a manner that conveys to the listener a complete benefit, upon which silence is appropriate. I'll say it again one more time. When you take two or more words and connect them together in a manner that communicates to the listener a complete benefit upon which silence is appropriate. In other words, once you're done speaking your two or more words and then you become quiet, one of two things will happen. Either your listener will be satisfied and they will have received the complete benefit and they're not waiting for anything further. Okay? That's one possibility. And the other possibility is that they're still waiting and they want you to finish it. If they're not waiting, then that means what you said was a sentence and you can put a period and you're done. And if they're still waiting, then that means what you spoke was a phrase. Every sentence has two parts. There's the primary portion, which we call the subject, and this is the thing you're talking about. And this has to be a noun or has to be an entity, like the word Zayd. I can create multiple examples, and what you would see is Zayd is a human, Zayd is tall, Zayd is in the house. So the word Zayd would be the subject of the sentence, and regardless of the kind of predicate, the subject will always be a noun. The predicate could also be a noun. So now you have two nouns. Or the predicate could be an adjective. The predicate could be a compound structure. It could be a verb. It could be a verb plus an object. So here's the 5 examples. If you remember these 5 examples, you'll never forget this topic. The 5 examples are, number 1, Zayd is a human. Number 2, Zayd is tall. Number 3, Zayd is in the house. Number 4, Zayd went. And number 5, Zayd hit Amr. So what's common between all 5 of those examples? What's common is that the word Zayd is at the front. In all 5 of them, Zayd is at the front. So we can say that regardless of the kind of predicate you're dealing with, the noun will always be at the front. Okay, so in the first example, the predicate was another noun. So they're both nouns. Zayd is a human. In the second example, the predicate is an adjective. Zayd is tall. In the third example, the predicate is a compound structure. Zayd is in the house. The fourth example is where the predicate is a verb. So the predicate is changing. Okay? A predicate is a verb, and in the fifth example, the predicate is a verb plus an additional object. So it's like a two-word predicate. Zayd hit Amr. Regardless of the kind of predicate you use, Zayd will always be at the front. Okay? Now, in English, all five examples, Zayd is at the front. But in Arabic, what will happen is that in three of them, Zayd will be at the front. But in two of them, the verb would be at the front and Zayd would get pushed forward. Okay? Yeah, because you don't have to use a verb. Like in the top three examples, there's no verb. In the fourth and fifth examples, there's verbs. And the minute you choose to use a verb, what happens is that the verb will be at the front. Because it's a rule. Because in Arabic, subjects of verbs must follow the verbs. So here are the five examples restated again, this time in Arabic. So Zayd is a human is Zaydun insanun. Zayd is tall is Zaydun tawilun. Zayd is in the house is Zaydun fil bayti. Zayd went is dhahaba Zaydun. And Zayd hit Amr would be daraba Zaydun Amran. Okay, so now what you're seeing here is that regardless of the kind of predicate you use in English, the subject is always at the front. In Arabic, in 60% of the time, the subject is at the front. 40% of the time, the subject gets pushed forward and the verb is at the front. So is this significant? The answer is very significant. Now, the grammar people, they noticed this. And based on this, they said this change is so fundamental. Let's go ahead and let's assign it a classification. So they took the sentence and they divided the sentence into two types. And they said sentences that begin with isms, we're going to call them jumla ismiya, and sentences that begin with verbs, we're going to call them jumla fi'liya. So in those five examples, the top three are examples of jumla ismiya, and the bottom two are examples of jumla fi'liya. Now, in the top three, we can say those are sentences without verbs. Now, technically, the word is a verb, but it's not represented in Arabic. Zaydun insanun only has two words. Zaydun tawilun only has two words. Right? So I can say that in the top three examples, those are verbless. Because in this context, when I say verb, I'm talking about hitting and helping and sitting and standing and eating and drinking. The top three examples do not have a verb of that kind, of the hitting and helping and sitting and standing and eating and drinking kind. Right? So it's about whether it's there or whether it's not there. So if it's not there, then jumla ismiya. And if that kind of verb, hitting and helping and sitting and standing, is being used, then automatically it causes a rearrangement in the words, and the predicate now is preceding, and the doer of the verb is delayed. So since this happens in Arabic and it doesn't happen in English, so that's why the number of terms that you need to retain in English are just two. And they are number one, subject, number two, predicate. In Arabic, because there's this fundamental shift occurring that in certain sentences the subject is at the front and in other sentences the subject is pushed forward, that's why the grammar people in Arabic, they have 6 terms. Instead of 2 terms, they have 6 terms. So there's the 2 terms that are generic, subject and predicate, regardless of the kind of sentence you're dealing with. And then there's the 4 more specific terms, and these are represented on this slide. Okay, so just take a minute and focus on this. So basically, in the far left, we have musnad, ilay, and musnad. So that's regardless of the kind of sentence you're dealing with. So every sentence has a musnad, ilay, and a musnad. Now, when you go more specific, and they ask you the question, Zaydun insanun, what are those? So you could say Zayd is musnad ilay and insanun is musnad, and that would be okay, that would be valid. But it's like referring to wine as a liquid. There's no need to do that. There's no need to refer to wine as a liquid because we have a better word, and the better word is beverage. Okay, did you understand that? So the difference between beverage and liquid. So the difference between mubtada and musnad ilay is the difference between beverage and liquid. So mubtada is more specific, and musnad ilay is more generic. Okay, so do we totally discard musnad ilay and musnad? No, they have their use as well. Musnad ilay and musnad are useful. Like in balagha, for example, in balagha, when it's more conceptual, like the ideas, when they're in their head, they're called musnad ilay and musnad, and then you look for words to communicate the ideas in your mind. So now, when you say it, the format you use would dictate the terms that will now be applied. While they were in your mind conceptually, they're musnad ilay and musnad, and then when they appear in the language, when they're used in an actual sentence, now you're not going to call it musnad ilayh. Musnad, you'll use the more specific terms, mubtada and khabar in the case of the nominal sentence, and fi'l and fa'il in the case of the verbal sentence. Okay, so let's continue now with further examples. So we already have 5 examples, and those 5 examples are somewhat sufficient to understand this topic. Okay, but if you want to go with the basic examples for the nominal sentence, we have al-kitabu jadidun, and the translation is the book is new. So this is an example of a sentence that doesn't have a verb. And again, when I say it doesn't have a verb, I'm talking about hitting and helping and sitting and standing and eating and drinking kind of verb, because the word is automatic anyways. Like, I mean, there's no word that represents is. Now, you still have to be able to differentiate it from the phrase, because you don't want it confusing with new book, because what we have in front of us is a sentence. The book is new. So how do you do that? So we'll talk about that in a few minutes in one of the upcoming slides. Let's keep going. So this al-kitabu jadidun, when you contrast it with the 5 examples, which example does it line up with the best? The correct answer is it lines up with the second one, because the second one was Zayd is tall, and tall is an adjective, jadid is an adjective. So that's the example. Okay, now an example of a basic verbal sentence, keeping in mind the fact that the doer of the verb must follow the verb, would be this: Dhahaba Zaydun, Zayd went, which is identical to the 4th example I gave you earlier. Zayd went. Now, if a verbal sentence is just 2 words, not a big deal. Dhahaba Zaydun, not a big deal, right? It really can't mean anything else. The translation would be Zayd went. But if the sentence is larger and longer, okay, then now it becomes an issue of how do you differentiate between the roles of the ism. Okay, you'd have to be able to slot those isms in their proper slots. So for that, let's revisit the parts of speech. If you remember, the parts of speech in Arabic are just 3. In English, there are more. And it's this graphic here. So the ism in Arabic is not just noun. It's also serving all of the purposes that an adjective and adverb would serve. So if I say today, I came quickly. Today I came quickly. So in that example, there's the verb came, and then there's the I, and then there's the today, and then there's the quickly. So in English, that would be a verb plus a pronoun plus 2 adverbs. Today is an adverb, and quickly is also an adverb. But in Arabic, we'd simplify it. We wouldn't say that. We would say that's a verb followed by 3 isms. Did you understand that? Verb followed by 3 isms. So the point is that the verbal sentence could become longer. Now, the bare minimum for a verbal sentence is, along with the verb, there has to be at least 1 ism, 1 noun. And that noun could be like physically present noun, or it could be carried within the verb. So if it's just dhahaba and they don't really say anything else, all they say is dhahaba, that's 2 words also. Because you can't have a sentence that's less than 2 words. That's not 2 words. It has to be at least 2 words. So dhahaba zaydun is 2 words, and dhahaba on its own is also 2 words. Okay, now for the maximum, there's no limit. And the verbal sentence could be longer. And what dictates the length of the verbal sentence is the amount of details that the speaker chooses to disclose. Because the sentence will have a when, and a where, and a why, and a how. So if it's relevant, and if it's important, and if the speaker feels the need to communicate that, the speaker would need to add additional isms to the sentence in order to communicate those details. You see? So it's quite normal for a verbal sentence to be followed by 3 to 5 isms. Very normal. Okay? Right, so here's an example. Darabtu al-yawma amran. Today I hit Amr. So this is an example of a verb followed by 3 isms. So 1 ism is the to, the other ism is the al-yawm, and the third ism is the amran. So in English that would be a verb followed by a pronoun, adverb, and noun. But we don't make that distinction, so we say verb followed by 3 isms. You got it. And here's another example where it's a verb followed by, again, 3 isms. An adverb followed by a noun followed by another noun. Right? So when the verbal sentence is only 2 words, then there's no issue, because it can't mean anything else. It can only mean Zayd went. Right? So the minute it becomes longer, now it's an issue of which of the 2 nouns is the one doing the verb, and which of the 2 nouns is the one upon whom the verb is being done. And if there's adverbs being used, then the reader and the listener need to know what those adverbs are doing. In other words, which questions are they answering? So pretend there's a verb followed by 5 isms. One of those 5 isms is the one doing the verb. One of those 5 isms is the one upon whom the verb is being done. One of those 5 isms is the answer to the question when, and then one of those 5 isms is, for example, the answer to the question how. Okay, and another one could be another detail that they're disclosing. Now, what you need to be able to do is you need to be able to read the sentence and not spend too much time and be able to effortlessly slot those isms into their proper roles, and you got to do it without wasting mental energy. Okay, because the assumption is that you're going to read 12. You're lying on your bed and you have the tafsir of, I don't know, Ibn Jarir in your hands, and you're reading through what the scholar's writing. So if you're pausing on every verbal sentence and you're spending 5 minutes to determine which noun is the doer and which noun is the object and which noun is the when, which ism is the when and the where and the why and the how, then you're going to gas out before you get through a single paragraph. So how do you facilitate speed reading? And how do you go through pages and pages and dozens of pages of material without feeling overwhelmed? You have to be able to do this. You have to be able to slot those isms into their proper roles. So this becomes particularly significant and important given the fact that sequence does not determine grammar. Now, some languages, they use sequence to do it. Some languages do use extra words. So Arabic doesn't have extra words to help you with this, and Arabic also doesn't use sequence. So in Urdu, for example, when they want to say Zayd Amr, they say Zayd ne Amr ko mara. So we have the extra word ne, we have the extra word ko. So with that, it becomes a non-issue. Like differentiating between the roles of the isms becomes a non-issue because the ne and the ko are doing it for us, right? In English, the order of the words is determining the grammar. So again, it's a non-issue. So in Arabic, since sequence does not determine grammar, and we don't have extra words, so we need to be able to do it. So how do we do it? So we do it through a particular process. And this is the process that's likened to human emotions and facial expressions, and we call it the grammatical states process. So let me give you an example on the next slide with 6 ways of saying Zayd Amr. Okay, there's 6 ways of saying Zayd Amr. So one of them is the default one, and that's the one that's here. Daraba Zaydun Amran. So if you wanted to communicate that Zayd Amr, and that's really all you're doing, then you wouldn't deviate away from Daraba Zaydun Amran, that's the one you would use. Now the other 5 are available, and they're all valid, and they also mean the same thing. They also mean Zayd Amr. They're all available for you to create a better match with the audience. So the listener might already know that the hitting happened, and the listener might already know that it was Zayd that did the hitting, and the only new information you're communicating is that it was Amr that Zayd hit, in which case you would use this one, Amran daraba Zaydun. So that's the benefit of this. The benefit of this is that it gives you flexibility. You can arrange the verb and the 2 nouns in multiple ways, and you can create a better match with the requirement of the occasion. Does that make sense? Now, grammar-wise, so how do we differentiate between the roles? We differentiate between the roles because Zaydun in all 6 examples is dun. Amran in all 6 examples is Amran. So the particular ending that Zayd has tells us that Zayd's the doer. The particular ending that Amr has is telling us that Amr is the object. Now it doesn't matter whether Zayd's at the front or whether Zayd's in the middle or whether Zayd's at the end. The meaning's the same. Okay. So the problem within verbal sentence is that sequence does not determine grammar, and the solution is to know the grammatical states and to know how they are reflected at the end on the ends of the isms. In the case of the nominal sentence, it's a different issue. Now again, when the nominal sentence is just 2 words, it's a non-issue. Because al-kitabu jadidun, it really can't mean anything else. Of course, you'd have to still be able to keep it separate from the phrase. Like you don't want to mix it up with the phrase. Okay, now I've written the phrase on the slide, al-kitabul jadidu, that one's a phrase. So that's merely a function of knowing the requirements of the phrase, that in the mawsuf sifa, in the noun adjective phrase, both parts of the phrase need to match in their definite indefinite value. So when you know that, and then you're faced with al-kitabu jadid and you have no trouble disqualifying the phrase because al-kitabu jadidun are not matching. Al-kitabu is definite and jadidun is indefinite, so therefore it can't be a phrase. So with that out of the way, there's no issue. It's become a non-issue. Now, even though there is no is, what else would you do? You translated the book is new. You see? But when the nominal sentence becomes larger, like 3 words, 4 words, 5 words, now, and the fact that we don't have an is, now you have to be able to divide the sentence into its proper parts and you'd have to determine from where to where is the mubtada, where to where is the khabar. In English, this is a non-issue. Because in English, I can give you a very long sentence in English, and you would have no trouble figuring out the meaning of it. For example, this book, which Ishaq alayhi salam built, this masjid, which Ishaq alayhi salam built in Sham, is Baytul Maqdis. Did you have any trouble with that? No. It was 10 plus words, but still you had no trouble with it because there was a word within that English that what was on the left side of that word was the subject, and what's on the right side of the word is the predicate, and that is the word is. It's there in the English. Okay, yeah. So here's the example. This masjid which Ishaq alayhi salam built in Sham is Baytul Maqdis. So the word, so you would say all the words until the word Sham is the subject, and Baytul Maqdis would be the predicate. Now, if I do that in Arabic, here's how it is. هذا المسجد الذي بناه إسحاق في الشام بيت المقدس. This masjid which Ishaq alayhi salam built in Sham is Baytul Maqdis. So I dropped it in the proper spot. So I know from هذا until the word Sham, all of those words together are connecting and forming the mubtada, and Baytul Maqdis would be the khabar. Baytul Maqdis would be the khabar. Now, but the Arabic doesn't have an is. So how do we do it? How do we figure this out? Like conceivably, it could have been hadha on its own as the mubtada, and then al-masjid until the end, all of those words together connecting and forming the predicate. It could have been the first two words on their own being the subject, and then alladhi onwards connecting and forming the predicate. So how do we know this? Remember the earlier issue in the verbal sentence was that the verb was followed by multiple isms, and we needed to be able to slot those isms into their proper roles without wasting mental energy, and we had to be able to do it effortlessly, especially given the fact that sequence does not determine grammar and we don't have extra words. So how is it done? It's done by knowing the process that's likened to human emotions and facial expressions, and that's taught in week 3. Okay, and a little of it I'll teach right now as well. In the nominal sentence, the issue is a completely different issue. It's the lack of is issue. And it's to be able to determine from where to where is the mubtada, where to where is the khabar, specifically when there's no is to do it for us. So how do we do it? We do it by moving from right to left and looking for phrase level relationships. And at some point, we'll notice that the phrase level relationships stop and they exhaust, and there's no requirements being satisfied. When that happens, you know your mubtada is over, and you know that that's where the predicate begins. Yeah, so it's done by knowing the phrase level relationships. Okay, so the types of phrases in Arabic are 16. There's 16, and the possessive phrase is one of them. The descriptive phrase is one of them, and the requirements for a possessive phrase are: number one, noun A needs to be empty of al, noun A needs to not have tanween, and noun B needs to end in kasra or be in the state of jar, have a very specific ending as opposed to other endings that are possible. So kitabu zaydin. You see? So if you start your sentence with a noun that's empty of al and also doesn't have tanween, and then the second word in the sentence is in jar, then you can't drop the is in between and say kitab is mubtada and zayd is the predicate. You can't do that because the two are functioning as a single unit. Does that make sense? So as long as the requirements of a particular phrase are being satisfied, your predicate cannot begin. It has to happen after all of this is done. You see that? Okay. So look, let's pay a little more attention to this example. If you the word hadha, it means this. And I know from my knowledge of the Arabic language. Now obviously you will learn this over time. So you might be taught this in week 4 or week 5 or week 6, but at some point you will know also. The point is that this is an ongoing process. The point is not to learn all of grammar in 1 hour. Because if we knew everything there is to know, so what I'm highlighting the issue and I'm telling you what the solution is. But you're not going to be able to apply this solution until you know the 16 phrases. And that goes without saying, obviously, right? So hadha, I know that when it occurs, it can occur on its own, or it can occur coupled with the upcoming noun as part of a phrase. And what determines whether hadha is on its own versus where hadha is combining with the upcoming noun and forming a phrase is the upcoming noun having an al or not having an al. So over here in this example, hadha al-masjidul ladhi, does the upcoming noun have an al or does it not? The answer is yes, it does. So هذا المسجد is clearly a phrase. So what I wouldn't do is say هذا is mubtada and al-masjid onwards is khabar. That's not allowed. So هذا المسجد together is forming a phrase. Now I do the same thing that I did between هذا and al-masjid with al-masjid and al-ladhi, and I'll look for a phrase level relationship. So I know, based on my knowledge of the Arabic language, and again you will learn this by about week 9 or week 7 or someplace, you will know this. It's like the istansaru example. The istansaru example that was taught in the very beginning. I teach that to people that are cold off the street, and people that don't know what passive is, people that don't know what enhancements are, and don't know that sin and ta is for seeking, and nun sadra is for hitting, for helping. So the point is that this is an example. So please don't overthink this. And the topic will be taught at a more appropriate time. So here's the deal, very briefly. Whenever you have a noun and you want to describe it using an adjective as part of a phrase, then you need to make sure that the noun and the adjective are matching. So it would be like al-kitabul jadidu. Okay, and kitabun jadidun. So the first one means the new book, the second one means a new book. We know that. How about if you want to describe a noun using a full sentence? Okay, while keeping the whole thing a phrase, which is what's happening here. Because the masjid is being described by the fact that Ishaq built it in Sham. So Ishaq built in Sham is a full sentence. So when you do that in English, you use who, what, which. So the who, what, which needs to come in between, and you'd say this masjid which Ishaq al-Islam built in Sham is Baytul Maqdis. So in Arabic, the equivalent for that is al-ladhi. So al-ladhi will be brought in between, and we have a phrase level relationship going on between al-masjid and the alladhi banahu Ishaq fi Sham structure. Now alladhi banahu Ishaq fi Sham is being introduced with the relative pronoun. Alladhi is called the relative pronoun, and relative pronouns presupposes clauses. Like you can't have a which, who, what, which, and not be followed by a sentence after that. It can't happen. You can't say this is the book which, and then just end it there, or I read what, and then just end it there. Like it doesn't make any sense. You have to say I read what you wrote. So the you wrote is what I'm talking about. It's called the clause. So we have the relative pronoun plus the clause. The two together connect and form whatever they're going to form. Okay, the two together connect and function as a single unit. So alladhi plus the banahu ishaq fi Sham. This is one of the 16 phrases. In case you haven't already figured it out. Right? It is. So I know the requirements of it. So I can do this effortlessly. I don't have to spend any time with this at all. Now the point is that as a student, these are the things you're going to be taught, and it's incredibly liberating to know these things ahead of time. Okay, now again, a lot of people, they study for 10 years and nobody shows them this. Nobody shows them the relevance of phrases. They don't know why phrases are important or what role they play. You see, so in this presentation, what I'm doing is I'm highlighting the important topics in grammar, and I'm telling you that here's the relevance of it. So you know the importance and you know the relative importance, and this is huge. It's incredibly valuable. So hopefully you're appreciating it, right? So now that alladhi is there, the predicate cannot start. It can't start. Now that alladhi is there, banahu is a clause, and the clause is a full sentence. So now that sentence has to complete, and unless that sentence completes, the predicate can't start. So ishaqu is the subject, the fa'il for bana, and fish sham is connected to the verb. So now that we hit the word sham, now we see, is there anything missing? Have all of the requirements of the alladhi structure been satisfied? The answer is yes. Now the word baytu is coming. Now does baytu connect in any way, shape, or form? The answer is no. So what do? We drop the is in between. So from hadha until sham, all of those words together connect and form the mubtada, and baytul maqdis connect together and form the khabar, 2 words. So total number of words are 10, and the division is 8 and 2, and I can say that with 100% degree of confidence. My confidence level is 100%. And obviously, when you know all the principles that led to that, then your confidence will also be 100%. And the point is that it becomes subconscious. And when you're reading, you just drop the is in the correct spot, and you don't really need it. Okay, is that fine? So to recap, the problem in the nominal sentence is lack of is, and that's how do you know from where to where is the mubtada and where to where is the khabar. Okay, and the solution is to know the phrase level relationships and be able to move from right to left and exhaust them. And then you drop the is where the phrase level relationships end. Okay. Right. Okay. So phrases are important. Phrases are important because without knowing phrases, you cannot translate that. Like if I give you a 10-word long nominal sentence and I tell you to translate it, your likelihood of translating it correctly is like really low, slim to none, unless you know the 16 phrases. Okay. And again, the 16 phrases, they're not all created equal either. They're not all created equal. There's like 3 or 4 of them that are more important than the other 12 combined. Okay, 80-20, right? The 3 or 4 of them, mudaf, mudaf ilayhi, mawsuf, sifa, are definitely belong to that, right? So if you know the vocabulary of every word in that 10-word long nominal sentence and you know the requirements for the phrases, it is mathematically impossible. It's like logically, rationally impossible for you to mistranslate that sentence. That's how important this is. Okay, and if you don't know that, your likelihood of mistranslating is incredibly high. So this knowing the phrases is key, and this is half of grammar essentially. The other half of grammar is the grammatical states. So let me speak a little about the grammatical states, and then I'll end this presentation. Okay, I'll probably go on for another 15 minutes. So grammatical states is important because the ism could be used in many, many different ways. And when a verb is combined with multiple isms, differentiating between the roles of the isms becomes important. It's important to be able to differentiate between the roles of the nouns. So here's how we introduce the topic of grammatical states. So we say that human beings experience emotional states, right? People make us happy, angry, sad, embarrassed, etc., frustrated. Sometimes they satisfy our expectations, other times they don't. And it happens because of interaction with other humans. And these emotions are then reflected on our faces. So by looking at the person's face, you can tell what state they're experiencing. Isn't that right? Okay, now Arabic words behave in a similar fashion. So words interact with other words, they interact with one another, and they induce change, and they cause the upcoming words to enter grammatical states. These states are then reflected on the last letter. Unlike human emotions, which are endless, grammatical states in Arabic are just 3. And we see this to a very limited degree in English pronouns. And when I say we see this, I'm talking about the word looking different based on how it's used. So we have a meaning, and we're trying to communicate that meaning in 3 different sentences. The word would look slightly different in all 3. So this is like in pronouns. For most pronouns, you have 3 versions. You can say he, you can say him, and you can say his. So when the pronoun is intended to be subject of the verb, you'd say he came. When the pronoun is intended to be object of the verb, you'd say I saw him. And when the pronoun is intended to be part of a possessive structure, you say his pen. So why do they have 3? The reason is because you have to pick the correct one, right? You have to pick the correct one, but you wouldn't do that in nouns. So if it's a noun occurring in multiple ways, the noun looks the same. Why? Because sequence is determining grammar. Over there, there's no need to change the word. They're doing it in pronouns, like who knows why. Like the English people, they're doing it in pronouns, so it's interesting. I mean, we're familiar with it, we're somewhat comfortable with it, so we present it as an analogy. Just to give you a little idea. So the states that the ism experiences are 3. One of them is called rafa, the other one's called nasab, and the third one's called jar. And if you wanted, you can write beside the rafa he, beside the nasab write him, and beside the jar write his. So the pronoun would change, but nouns wouldn't. So like if you look at the translation column, it says the house fell, I entered the house, door of the house. So it's house, house, house. But if you look in the example column, in the Arabic, the Arabic word is actually different. Saqat al-baytu versus dakhaltu al-bayta versus babul bayti. Okay, so rafa, subject, nasab, object, jar, possessive. So does rafa mean subject? Does nasab mean object? And does jar mean possessive? You can think of it like that, he, him, and his. Okay, but really, these are just examples. So because the ism is not restricted to being used in just 3 ways. So subject, object, and possessive are examples to get our foot in the door. Okay, so to speak, right? But if you want to go more accurately, you'd have to contemplate the total number of ways an ism could be used. And that number is a large number. It's 22. Okay, why is the number so large? Because the ism is very broad. Okay, and it has a lot to do. Like it has to serve all of the purposes that an adjective would serve. It has to serve all of the purposes that an adverb would serve, like the when, the where, the why, and the how. So an ism would need to do all of that. So if I have a verb followed by 5 isms, that would be 5 examples of the way in which an ism could be used. So one of them subject, the other one's object, the other would be the why, the answer to the question why, and then how, and then where, when. And then we have different kinds of sentences. We have nominal sentences, we have verbal sentences, we have kana version sentences, sentences that begin with kana, and we have inna version sentences. And the components of every specific sentence is labeled differently. So in a nominal sentence, the parts are called mubtada and khabar. In a verbal sentence, the parts are called fi'l and fa'il, and if there's an object, then that object is called maf'ul bihi. It has a name, it's called maf'ul bihi. And then the when, where, it has a different name, the why has a different name, and the how there's a different name. So these are all examples of ways in which an ism could be used. So the house example doesn't really do justice, because the house example sort of projects that an ism could be used in 3 ways, but now we know that that can't be true. The total number of ways an ism could be used is a much larger number, and that number is actually 22. Yet, there's only 3 states. So the total number of ways an ism could be used is 22, but the states are just 3. So here's the $1 million question. The $1 million question is that if the ism could be used in 22 different ways, why don't we have 22 different endings? Why don't we have 22 different states? Okay, like the fa'il has its own ending, maf'ul bihi has its own ending, mubtada has its own ending, khabar has its own ending, and in the kana sentence, the subject of the kana sentence has its own ending, the predicate of the kana sentence has its own ending. So why don't we have 22 different endings? The answer is because there's no need for that. That would be redundant. Okay, we don't need many endings. Okay, first of all, we don't have that many endings. All we have is 3 vowels. So we're not going to invent 19 more vowels, because it's impossible. Vowels are somewhat limited to start with. Okay, so we don't have that many endings. And the other is that it would be redundant. We don't need them. And the reason I say we don't need them is because many of the 22 do not line up side by side, and you're not going to hear this anywhere else. So please pay attention. And this is going to be recovered in week 3. Okay, so I'm just giving you a broad overview here as a preview for what's coming in week 3. So like for example, ذهب زيد. The translation is Zayd went. Zaydun insanun. The translation is Zayd is a human. Now, the vowels that I used on Zayd in the first example are the same vowels I used on Zayd in the second example. But that's not problematic, because the fa'il and the mubtada, you're not going to encounter them side by side. So it allows me to recycle the vowel and use it more than once. And Zaydun and insanun having the same ending is not a problem either. Okay, why not? Because it's not about differentiating roles anyways. It's about knowing where to drop the is, and the solution to that is not this anyways. The solution to that is to know the phrases. So like in that هذا المسجد الذي بناه إسحاق في الشام بيت المقدس example, al-masjidu had a dhamma and baytu had a dhamma, not a problem. Not a problem. It did not stump us. It did not get in our way in understanding the meaning of that sentence. Actually, it played no role whatsoever. So the point is that if a verb is followed by 2 isms and then those 2 isms have the same ending, that would be an issue. That would be a problem, because truly we would not know which of the 2 nouns is the one doing the verb and which of the 2 nouns is the one upon whom the verb is being done, because they're both candidates. Because they're both candidates. Zayd could conceivably be the doer, Zayd could conceivably be the object, Amr could conceivably be the doer, Amr could conceivably be the object. So we need them to be different. But the mubtada and the fa'il do not need to be different. The mubtada and the khabar do not need to be different. Okay, did you understand that? Rewatch, please rewatch. If you didn't understand it, rewatch, write it down, transcribe it for yourself, okay, because it is that important. Okay, moving forward, and again, if you got a 60-70, that's fine, because in week 3 we're going to redevelop this topic more. Sometimes the kind of word gives it away, okay? Sometimes the kind of word gives it away, and the best example I can give you of this is this. ضربت اليوم عمرا, the translation is, today I hit Amr. So the word al-yawma and the word amran have the same ending, okay, and yet there's no problem determining the meaning of the sentence, because al-yawm is a time and Amr is an entity. So you can't hit the time, and the entity can't be the answer to the question when. Okay, so the meaning of the sentence is clear, and yet they have the same ending. So what we don't need is 22 different endings. What we don't need is 22 different endings. What we do need is the bare minimum amount of endings that would remove all confusion. And that number happens to be 3. And again, you're not going to hear that anywhere else, right? Okay. So what's the task at hand? What do we do now? So what we do now is that we study and we understand the 3 grammatical states, not as subject, object, and possessive. Okay, because rafa doesn't mean subject, nasab doesn't mean object, and jar doesn't mean possessive. Okay, but we understand them thoroughly and with a deep thought, a deep understanding, and we understand them as broad categories. Okay, so the 3 states that the ism experiences are broad categories, and the 22 possible ways are then distributed on the 3. So what's the division? It's 8, 12, and 2. 8, 12, and 2, because it has to add up, right? So there's 8 possible ways an ism is used in the language that are all rafa-based ways of using an ism. And there's 12 that are nasab-based ways of using an ism. And there's 2 for jar. So 8, 12, and 2. And if you know that, I swear by God, you know half of grammar. If you know that. Okay? And the other half is phrases. Oh gosh. It should feel like a 20-pound weight has been lifted off your shoulders at this stage right now. This is so manageable. There's no reason in the world why you can't be a master of grammar and an expert and be able to teach at my level even, okay, with just a few months of effort. Okay, so this is what we mean when we say that you start reading an Arabic book in 21 days, okay, or you start understanding Quranic Arabic in 21 days. You can't understand the entire language in 21 days, right? But the point is that most people could be studying for 10 years and they can't even access a basic children's book like this. من كسر الأصنام بائع الأصنام قبل أيام كثيرة. So Arabic is the first thing that the scholars study, and they continue studying it for the rest of their lives. Okay, so the study is not going to complete in 21 days, obviously, right? The point is that you're going to get out of the beginner stage within 21 days, and you're going to be able to access your first Arabic book within 21 days. And that is incredibly liberating, and it means that you're no longer spinning your wheels. So now the front, all of the effort, all of the considerable effort is over, and now it becomes enjoyable because now you're getting the payoff and everything is coming to life. So when we do this, man kasar al asnam, we're going to ask questions, and then we don't speak about everything. We speak about the things that we can easily use to enhance the understanding we've achieved thus far, and then we teach new grammar gradually in a way that does not overwhelm the student.
So now that we're done with this 2 core issues presentation, first of all, I'd like to thank you for making it this far and trusting me with your time and your attention. I really appreciate it. So the couple of things I would want to tell you at this stage is that this lesson that we just did right now is actually taken from the course. We would normally teach it in the 2nd week of class. And then the next one, the developing of the 22 possible ways an ism can be used, would be taught in the 3rd week of class. The students would have a 7-day gap between them, and then they'd be asking questions. In between, we would have live classes where we would test the students on their understanding to make sure that they're properly understanding it, and then we'll start the book. We start the book in the 3rd week of class after having developed the 22 possible ways the ism could be used. So the lesson I shared with you was the complete lesson. There was a 10 or 15 minute segment that I removed from the lesson because I didn't want it to be overly complex. So in the premium program, it would be the complete version of it. With the extra part that I removed, it would be added back into it. And the reason I'm doing this and giving you complete lessons is because I made a promise. In the beginning of the first video, I said that we have a method that allows students to progress 17 times faster, and half of all of the benefits you will ultimately achieve in your study of the Arabic language, you can literally achieve them in 3 hours. So that would not have been possible unless I shared with you the lesson that we just went through. And the final presentation is no exception. That also contributes, and together it will give you half of all of your benefits, and then the book begins. So if this method resonates with you, and if you see how this can work for you, then I invite you to look under this video and click the link that says get on the early bird list, because there's a lot of people that are currently watching these videos, and there's pent-up demand, and these classes, they only start up once a year, and we have a limited amount of students that we can accept. So go ahead and join the early bird list, and in the meantime, I'll be preparing the next video, and I will release that for you in a matter of a couple of days. I would also recommend that you rewatch this one a couple of times, the 2 core issues video, because it's that important. I tell the students that this is one of the 3 most important videos in the first 6 months, and you saw why. And I think that's it for now. Inshallah, in this next module, we're going to take a bit of a detour. And instead of talking about heavy grammar, like the total possible ways the ism could be used in the Arabic language, which is a very large number, 22, and developing them and speak about how to differentiate between the roles of the isms, we're going to do that in the final presentation. But in between, let's speak a bit about verbs, because the focus is to start a reading book as soon as humanly possible. And based on the way we've been doing it for over 20 years, that is 21 days. So in order to start the reading text in 21 days, we're going to need to know about at least two of the three categories of verbs. So there's the past tense verb called the al-fi'l al-madi, the madi verb, and then there's the present future one, which is the imperfect verb, and finally there's the command verb. So the command verb, we don't normally teach it in the opening days of class. We can leave it for later, it's not incredibly important, but the first two are important. Now the imperfect verb, we might not have time for it in this workshop, but at least the Madi table, I want to develop it for you line by line within this video. So in this video, we're going to speak about what a conjugation table is, why we need it, how it's arranged, and then we'll start filling the slots. So by the end of the presentation, you're going to be able to lift your head off the screen and literally recite the entire table from memory without making a mistake. Okay, so that's the goal I have for you in this presentation. So let's throw it over to the PowerPoint and I'll continue speaking with you there.
One of the factors that makes Arabic different is that the consonants will give you separate meaning and the vowels will give you separate meaning. So what looks like a single word will give you up to 7 meanings. Okay, one of them coming from the consonants and 6 more coming from vowel patterns and coming from designated endings and things of that nature. Okay, so the majority of meanings, they don't come from words, they come from patterns, and that's the vowel patterns. And there's single vowels, like at the end of the nouns, you'll have a particular vowel that tells you that this noun is a subject, and then you'll have a particular ending that tells you that this noun is an object, and that's grammar. Today's presentation right now is about verbs. It's the past, more specifically the past tense verb. So this is pattern related, right? And then there's grammatical structures. When you take 2 or more words and gather them together using a method sanctioned by the language, then the method will give you an additional meaning above and beyond the meaning of the words. Okay? So again, I don't want to go into detail here because we have to focus on the verb tables, right? So very briefly, if you go into the alphabet, you'll notice that there's 28 letters and they're all consonants. So there's the ba there, which is the equivalent of a B. Ta, which is the equivalent of a T in English. Jim is the equivalent of a J. And you can run through the whole alphabet. Some of them don't have English equivalents, but bottom line is that they're all consonants. Okay, and then there's vowels that are not part of the alphabet, but they're introduced on top and beneath the consonants to create the sounds of A, E, I, O, U. Okay, and there's not, in English there's 5, but in Arabic there's only 3. Okay, and we'll speak about those too in the next slide. Bottom line is that when words are constructed, it's done by grouping the consonants. So from the alphabet, there's 28 letters, so those 28 letters would be grouped into groups of 3. Okay, and every group of 3 would have an associated meaning. So for example, if you take a noon, a sad, and a ra, those 3 letters have the meaning of helping. Okay, jim, lam, and sin, those 3 letters have the meaning of sitting down. Sheen, ra, and ba, those 3 letters have the meaning of drinking. So hitting and helping and sitting and standing and eating and drinking, all of these meanings are achieved by grouping the letters into groups of 3. So 28 letters, how many groups of 3? You'd have tens of thousands of groups of 3. Now, the issue is that the consonants on their own are not pronounceable. So if you take a kaf, a ta, and a ba, okay, just 3 random letters, kaf, ta, and ba, those 3 letters, if you tried to pronounce them on your tongue without using any vowels, you wouldn't be able to do it because you'd come up with something like kt. Notice, all right, just try it. Kt. You can't do it. You'll end up saying kataba or kutiba, or you'd put a vowel on each one of them in order to make them pronounceable. Because when people speak, they don't speak in consonants. They speak in syllables, and a syllable is a sound that's achieved by combining a consonant and a vowel. So we need vowels. And again, that vowels, they're not part of the alphabet. They're introduced above and beneath the consonants that together give us the sounds associated to A, E, I, O, U, right? Okay, so the vowels, when they're added in order to make the consonants pronounceable. So that's purpose number 1, why we have vowels. In addition to making the letters pronounceable, the vowels also give us more meaning. They give us more meaning. More specifically, the tense and the voice is coming from the vowels. And this is the topic of today's presentation that I was in the past. So when you have one set of vowels, then that gives you past tense. And if you change the vowels and maybe add something extra, extra letter at the front, then it becomes present future. And if you change the vowels yet again, then it might become a command verb, right? So the letters are the same. The noon, sad, ra would be present in all variations of the word. So it's like a family. And what distinguishes a verb from all other verbs is the particular vowel configuration, and this is what we mean when we say pattern. Okay, so the vowels are three. There's the dhamma, which is represented on top of the letter, and you can see it there, and it corresponds to O or U in English. There's the fatha, which is a stroke that comes above the consonant, and it corresponds to an A in English. And the third one is a kasra, which is a stroke beneath the consonant, and it corresponds to the sound of I or E. So like a ba with a dhamma on top of it will be pronounced bu. A ba with the fatha on top of it will be pronounced ba, and with the kasra it will be pronounced b. So bu, ba, and b. And then we have a symbol, which is a circle called sukun. And this is like in English, you have three-lettered words like the word fun, or the word bat, or the word ball, or whatever it is. Like it starts with the consonant, there's a vowel in the middle, and then there's a consonant at the end that's not followed by another vowel. So when that happens in Arabic, the consonant has that symbol on it. Okay, and it's called a sukun. And then finally there's a shadda, and this is duplicating of the letter, because when you have a word in English where the first syllable ends in the same consonant that the second syllable begins in, then normally they write the letter twice, like the word pretty or the word funny. So notice P-R-E-T-T-Y, pretty. So that's two syllables, pretty, and the letter is actually written twice. And funny, same deal, F-U-N-N-Y. In Arabic, it's not written twice. It's only written once, and this symbol is placed on top of it, and it means pronounce the letter twice. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's talk about why we need verb tables. So in English, there's no need for verb tables. Okay, and there's two reasons why there's no need for verb tables in English. And it's the opposite of those two reasons that in Arabic puts a heavy emphasis on tables. So they don't need it in English because of two reasons. And the flip of those two reasons is precisely the reason why we need it in Arabic. Okay, so number one, in English, when you combine a verb with a pronoun, like sleeping, for example, you want to combine it with he, or combine it with she, or combine it with they, then it doesn't matter about the gender of the one doing the sleeping, or whether it's one person doing the sleeping, or a group of people doing the sleeping, or whether you're doing the sleeping, or whether I'm doing the sleeping, makes no difference. The verb is slept, and the verb doesn't change, and there's actually a space in between. So it would be like he slept, she slept, they slept, you slept, I slept, we slept. So the gender and the plurality and the person of the one doing the sleeping has no impact on the verb. The verb looks the same, right? Okay, and number two, there's not so many of them. There's only 6 of them. Okay, he, she, they, you, I, and we. In Arabic, it's the total flip of that, because in Arabic, when the pronoun is attached to the verb, by the way, this is called conjugating. When you take a pronoun and combine it with the verb, that's called conjugating. So in Arabic, it's represented with a letter at the end of the verb. So the verb would be the first 3 letters, and then the pronoun would be a letter at the end. So the total will become 4. And there'll be no space in between. There'll be no space in between. So it's literally, it looks like the same word is being repeated multiple times, and the number is not 6. In English it's 6. In Arabic it's actually 14. Okay, so in Arabic the verb changes and it's attached to the pronoun, and it looks like it's a single word, right? And number 2, there's 14 of them. So when you have the same, what looks like the same word being repeated 14 times, slightly different, then this calls for a table. Calls for a table. So now why 14? Let's give you some significance on the number 14. Okay, because the one you're talking about, or the one doing the verb, you're either speaking about the doer, or you're speaking to the doer, or you yourself are the doer. So we call the first one third person. We call the second one second person. When you're speaking to a doer, that's called second. You're speaking in the second person. So you. And when the speaker themselves is the doer, like I and we, that's called first person. Now each one of those could be masculine and feminine. Okay? Masculine and feminine. And then it could be 1, 2, or a group, 1, 2, or a group, because Arabic has a dual. So if I wanted to speak about 2 males, there's a different way of doing that than if I wanted to speak about 3 or more males. Same thing with females. If I wanted to speak about 2 females, there's a different way of doing that than speaking about a group of females. So we have 1, 2 group. So that would be he, they, and then she. Now we're moving on to the females, the feminine. She, one female, speaking about one female. They, two females. They, group of females. And then you, depending on who you're speaking to, whether you're speaking to one male, two males, group of males, one female, two females, group of females. And then in the first person, they don't make a distinction, and it's just I and we. And gender becomes irrelevant. So if you're a man speaking about yourself, or if you're a woman speaking about yourself, you'd use the same verb essentially. Okay, so if you count that up, there's 14 of them, and we'll show you on the next couple of slides in a table format what those 14 are. Okay, but first, notice that there's actually 4 theys. And in English makes no distinction whatsoever between whether you're speaking about 2 people or a group of people, because their plural starts at 2. Our plural in Arabic doesn't start at 2. So we have a singular, we have a dual, and then plural would be 3 or more. Not 2 or more, 3 or more. So essentially there's 4 days, which is a big deal, right? So that's caused our number to become much larger. So instead of 6 pronouns like they have in English, we have 14 pronouns. 14 pronouns. And the point is that they're all different. That's the point. Okay, so if you look at the screen now, this is the third person layout. Now from all of the columns, just focus on the 4th column, the English equivalent column. He, they, she, they. Okay, so you should be able to put up your head and say he, they. So the first they is 2 males, the second they is 3 or more males, and then she, and then they, specifically 2 females, and then they, group of females. Okay, and then we have you, 1 male, 2 males, 3 or more males, 1 female, 2 females, 2 or more females. So now we're at 12. So the first 6 are he, they, she, they, and now 6 yous in the middle. And then finally there's I and we. And over here gender is irrelevant, masculine, feminine, doesn't make a difference, there's I. And then in the number 14, dual becomes irrelevant also, so now it's just we. Just same as it is in English, So you'll see all of them on the screen right now. So there's 14 of them. He, again, focus on the 4th column. He, they, she, they, 6 use I and we. So at this stage right now, you should be able to lift your head off the screen and say that. Okay? He, they, she, they, 6 use I and we. Could you do that? Pause the video if you need to. He, they, she, they, 6 use I and we. Okay. So now we're about to dive into the table. So like I said, the letters of the alphabet are taken, 3 of them, and then those 3 receive a particular pattern to convey past tense. Okay, and for the present future, there would be a different pattern. For the command verb, there would be a different pattern. And for any other verb, the pattern would just be different. The letters would be the same. The consonants would be the same. So right now, we're developing the past tense table, simple, 3-lettered, and the model pattern for the past tense is fa'ala. And what that means is that each of those 3 consonants would be pronounced with the fatha. So you just change the letters, like the 2 examples on the bottom of the screen. Nasara means helped, jalasa means sat. And by default, they would mean he. Yeah, because there's 14 of them, and 13 of them will have endings. Okay, not all 14 don't need to have endings, because if 13 of them have endings, then one of them could be empty, and by default it would mean he anyways. Okay, the absence of all other endings would suggest to the reader or the listener that that it's a male being spoken about, one male. Okay, so fa'ala. Now what we do is we speak about how to turn that into 2 males. So what modification to fa'ala would need to be done in order to make it 2 males? So you'd add an alif at the end. Okay, so adding an alif would change it into 2, so fa'ala fa'ala. And the examples are nasara, they helped, 2 males helped. Jalasa, they helped, they sat, 2 males sat. Okay, so now we have fa'ala fa'ala. Fa'ala fa'ala. To turn it into group of males, group of males, you'd add a waw at the end, and the waw would need to be preceded by a dhamma. So fa'alu, and then there's a silent alif at the end, and there's a wisdom behind that, there's a benefit for the silent alif, but I won't go into that right now for the sake of time. So bottom line is fa'alu. So we have fa'ala, fa'ala, fa'alu, he, they. Okay, so could you do that? Could you lift your head off the screen and say fa'ala, fa'ala, fa'alu? Make sure you can do that. Fa'ala, fa'ala, fa'alu. Fa'ala, fa'ala, fa'alu. One more time. Fa'ala, fa'ala, fa'alu. And the examples are nasaru, they, group of males helped. They, group of males sat, jalasu. Now moving into the females, the she one, conjugation number 4. the particular ending that tells us that this is a female, one female we're talking about, is a ta with a sukoon on it. Okay, it will be a ta with a sukoon on it, fa'alat. So now from the top, fa'ala, fa'ala, fa'alu, fa'alat. Okay, fa'ala, fa'ala, fa'alu, fa'alat. When speaking about two females, that two females did a certain action, whether it's helping or hitting or sitting or standing, then the ending would be the same ta that we just added right now, plus an alif. So it would be like a ta, fa'alata, fa'alata. So the examples are nasarata, they two females helped, jalasata, they two females sat. Right? So fa'ala, fa'ala, fa'alu, fa'alat, fa'alata. At this stage again, you should be able to do that. You should be able to lift your head off the screen and say fa'ala, fa'ala, fa'alu, fa'alat, fa'alata. One more time. Fa'ala, fa'ala, fa'alu, fa'alat, fa'alata. Now we're moving into the group of females, and the particular ending that tells us that the doer is a group of females would be a noon, and that noon would have a fatha on it. Okay, noon with a fatha on it, and a very special thing happens on the verb, and that is that the third letter of the verb, which we call the lam position. So the fa position, the ayn position, the lam position, third letter. Lam position means third letter. So the third letter of the verb will receive a sukoon. And that sukoon would then maintain until the bottom of the table. And the ending would be added after the sukoon. So from the top it was fa'ala, fa'ala, fa'alu. Okay, fa'ala, fa'ala, fa'alu, fa'alat, fa'alata. And then now all of a sudden fa'alna. And the rest of them would be like that. Fa'al ending, fa'al ending, fa'al ending, fa'al ending, fa'al ending, fa'al ending, all the way into the bottom. So the bottom 9 all have a sukoon on their third letter. Okay, and the top ones never had that. Fa'ala, fa'ala, fa'alu, fa'alat, fa'alata, fa'alna. Fa'alna, they group of females helped, they group of females sat, nasarna, jalasna. Okay, so now we're done with the top 6. He, they, she, they. So what we do now is we isolate the endings for the middle 6. And we sort of get our head around those endings, and then we just add the fa'al part, and miraculously 6 more. Okay, so let me tell you what those endings are. Ta, tuma, tum, ti, tuma, tunna. I'll say it again. Ta, tuma, tum, ti, tuma, tunna. So ta is the designated ending when you're speaking to a male. When you're speaking to a male, you have a male in front of you, and you say you. So that would be ta. Tuma is when there's 2 people in front of you, males. Tum is when you're speaking to a group of males that you sat or helped or drank or whatever the action is. And then ti is when speaking to one female, tuma is when speaking to 2 females, and tunna is when you're speaking to a group of females. And I'll toggle the slides in a minute. So, but for now, all you need is ta, tuma, tum, ti, tuma, tunna. So it's not on the screen, but just try to memorize that. I mean, it's not particularly difficult because on the one hand it rhymes, and so it's like memorizing a phone number. Like, how many times have you not had a pen and you were required to memorize a phone? You just did it, didn't you? So this is a lot easier than that. Ta, tuma, tum, ti, tuma, tunna. One more time. Ta, tuma, tum, ti, tuma, tunna. So now let's go through the next ones. So the designated ending for number 7 is ta, fa'alta. So now from the top, fa'ala, fa'ala, fa'alu, fa'alat, fa'alata, fa'alna. Fa'alta, fa'altuma. Tuma is the ending. And then the next one will be fa'altum, group of males. So now we have 9 of them. And they are from the top, fa'ala, fa'ala, fa'alu, fa'alat, fa'alata, fa'alna, fa'alta, fa'altuma, fa'altum, fa'alta, fa'altuma, fa'altum. And you already know the next 3. Fa'alti, fa'altuma, fa'altunna. The next 3. Speaking to a female, speaking to 2 females, speaking to a group of females. So fa'alta, fa'altuma, fa'altum, fa'alti, fa'altuma, fa'altunna. So here's number 10, fa'alti. And then number 11 is fa'altuma. Okay, and number 12 is fa'altunna. Okay, so now from the top, fa'ala, fa'ala, fa'alu, fa'alat, fa'alata, fa'alna, fa'alta, fa'altuma, fa'altum, fa'alti, fa'altuma, fa'altunna. And when you're speaking about yourself, whether you're a male or female, it doesn't matter. Then the ending for that is a tu, which is a ta with a dhamma. And then now we have 11. Now notice one thing, that the ta ending happens in quite a few of them. Like number 4 had a ta ending, fa'alat, and that was a ta with a sukoon, she. Okay, and then we have fa'alta when you're speaking to a male, fa'alti when you're speaking to a female, and fa'altu when you're speaking about yourself. You see? So that's very efficient because the same letter was repurposed like 4 times. And one of them was a sakin letter, and the other ones had vowels, and all 3 vowels were pretty much used for that purpose. Pretty efficient. And it's also interesting, so I mentioned it. And now for the very last one, the ending is a noon and an alif, fa'alna. And we saw a noon in the sixth one when speaking about a group of females, fa'alna, but that was without a stretch. That was just fa'alna, and this one fa'alna. Fa'alna, nasarna, jalasna. We helped, we sat. And that, my friend, concludes the table. From the very top, fa'ala, fa'ala, fa'alu, fa'alat, fa'alata, فعلنا فعلت فعلتما فعلتم فعلتي فعلتما فعلتن فعلت فعلنا. Now, pause the video, just try to do that. فعل فعلا فعلوا فعلت فعلتا فعلنا فعلت فعلتما فعلتم فعلتي فعلتما فعلتن فعلت فعلنا. Now, the table layout, we spent quite a bit of time at the beginning introducing the layout and speaking about, third person, second person, first person, 662, he, they, she, they, 6 use, I, and we. So with that in mind, then it's just a matter of filling the slots. You see that? So introducing the table layout, speaking about the reason why we need tables, and also why in English there's no tables. There's no tables in English for two reasons. First of all, the number is very small, it's only 6. And number two, the pronoun and the verb in English are written separately, and the verb is not impacted. It stays the same. Slept, 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 slept. Regardless, he slept, she slept, they slept, slept doesn't change. But in Arabic, it's written together and there's no space in between, so that calls for a table. That justifies spending time on a table. So there's a heavy emphasis in classical Arabic on verb patterns and verb tables, and there's a whole science that deals with it called sarf, morphology. Right? So this is a lesson in morphology, basically, what we gave you right now. So spending that time in the beginning, speaking about the reasoning and the relative importance and what role this plays, right? And then contrasting it with English and speaking about why in English there's no emphasis on this and the reasons for that, and the opposite of those two reasons why in Arabic there's a heavy emphasis on this, and then speaking about the layout, okay, like how it's organized. The third person ones are at the top, the second person ones are in the middle, the I and we is at the bottom. That's the equivalent of sharpening the axe, because I think it was Lincoln that said that, if I had 6 hours to cut down a tree, I'd spend the first 4 hours sharpening the axe. So now I'm not much of a math guy, but that sounds a lot like, what is it, 66%? So 6% of his time he spends sharpening the axe, and 33% of the time he's cutting the tree. So this is what we do. When we teach these topics, we try to conceptually use analogies, contrast with English, and then the filling the slots part can happen rather quickly once you have a framework. So now we have the whole table in front of us. فعل فعلا فعلوا فعلت فعلتا فعلنا فعلت فعلتما فعلتم فعلتي فعلتما فعلتن فعلت فعلنا. Now let's wrap this thing up. So now the particular vowels were fatha, fatha, fatha. Basically all 3 letters had a fatha to convey the past tense. Now if you wanted to make that passive, and instead of saying he helped, they helped, she helped, they helped, you helped, I helped, we helped, instead of conveying those meanings, you're conveying the meanings of he was helped, they were helped, she was helped, they were helped, you were helped, I was helped, we were helped. And how is that done? That's by making 2 simple vowel changes to the earlier pattern. So the second to last letter, which is the ayn, it receives a kasra, and the very first letter would receive a dhamma, and fa'ala would become fu'ila. Now what happens is that those endings, the alif and the waw and the ta, tuma, tum, ti, tuma, all those endings, they're no longer representing the doer, the subject. They're now representing the object, and the subject is missing. Okay, the doer is suppressed, and now the verb is attributed to the object. Okay, and that's literally what passive means. So verb is connected to the object. It's predicated to the object, and the subject is missing, and the rest stays the same. So it's nusira, nusara, nusiru, nusirat, nusirata, nusirna, nusirta, nusirtuma, nusirtum, nusirti, nusirtuma, nusirtunna, nusirtu, nusirna. And the translations are there on the screen. You can see them. He was helped, they were helped, she was helped, they were helped, you were helped 6 times, depending on who you're speaking to. I was helped, we were helped. So nasara, nasara, nasaru is active, nusira, nusara, nusiru would be passive. And if you wanted to make those negative, you'd simply add a ma at the front, and ma is a particle, and it means not. So instead of he helped, it would be he did not help. Instead of she helped, it would be she did not help. Instead of we helped, it would be we did not help. And on the passive side, instead of he was helped, he was not helped. She was not helped, we were not helped. And that pretty much concludes the presentation. So you add this ma at the front, and now we have 4 of them. Nasara, nusira, ma nasara, and ma nusara. And this is what I meant when I said that by the end of the presentation, it won't be just one table that you memorize, but actually 4. So now that we're done with this past tense table video, let me know how it went. Were you able to memorize the entire table? And if you weren't able to, maybe 60-70%, then I would suggest to go back and rewatch just that segment. Like, you don't have to watch from the beginning, because the earlier part of the presentation was more about sharpening the axe, because Lincoln, he said that if you give me 6 hours to cut down a tree, I'll spend the first 4 hours sharpening the axe. So knowing what a table is, wrapping your head around why this is important, and then understanding the arrangement and the format, the layout of the table before filling the slots is the equivalent of sharpening the axe. And then it's just a matter of fa'ala, fa'ala, fa'alu, fa'alat, and then when we get to the bottom. And then while we're doing it, we take 3 at a time, and then take 6, and then we do the middle 6, and then we combine it, and we do all 14. So it's really easy. And verb tables is like removing 99% of the effort from vocabulary building. Like when you're good at sarf. When you're good at sarf, then it enhances and accelerates the amount of words that you will have. And then the focus is obviously to begin the reading text as soon as possible. So again, this video that we just did right now is pretty light presentation. I wouldn't recommend watching it like a gazillion times. Maybe once more if you weren't able to memorize it. But if you were able to memorize it, then I think you can put this behind you. Now the imperfect table, we would teach that in the premium program. Now in the next video, we're going to develop the 22 possible ways that ism could be used. Inshallah, in a minute, we're going to get to work, and we're going to develop the 22 possible ways an ism could be used. Because my goal within this workshop was not to just give a broad overview and just make some promises, but instead, I actually wanted to give to you as much of the 4% of the language that is required in order to begin any reading within the workshop alone. So whether you choose to invest in the premium program or you choose not to, I wanted you to feel that your time was well spent, and that's important for me, okay? And also, the program is 2 years long, and there's an incredible amount of commitment from both the teacher as well as the student. So I wanted you to feel confident that this learning style and this approach does work for you, okay? So if you like the videos, then you'll love the premium program. And inshallah, within a couple of days, we're gonna open up registration, and I'll have a separate video ready for you in which I'll answer every question that you might have on your mind, like what is the weekly commitment? How many hours are expected from you per week? And how much of it's live? How much of it's pre-recorded? How exactly is the program structured? And what are the outcomes and the goals that you can expect to achieve in the first 3 weeks? What level can you expect to be at month 6, for example? And how much of the language will you have mastered by the first year of the program? So all of these questions will be responded to, but today we have to move to video 4, and this is the presentation that the sister was talking about, the sister from the UK who emailed the help desk when we opened up registration. She couldn't quite afford the tuition, so she was asking for an adjustment, which we were able to accommodate her, alhamdulillah, and she did sign up for the program. So she said that I've been studying Arabic for the last 10 years. In parentheses, she said, yes, 10, and this is the 11th. And I kept struggling, and I always thought it was too slow. So I kept quitting. And I thought that you have to sit down with long list of vocabulary, and for every singular, you need to figure out the plural and memorize the plural. For every plural, you need to memorize the singular. And it was just so boring and tedious, and I kept giving up. But alhamdulillah, I always had hope in Allah that there's a faster, not faster, but easier way. So I kept trying again. And then she said, subhanallah, everything I studied, he covered in a single hour. And it all made sense. It was not tedious. You can't imagine the amount of money that I spent on studying Arabic. I wish I hadn't, because then I would be able to pay for this course. So this is what we're about to take you to right now. The presentation she's talking about. And we're going to start with the human emotions and the facial expressions. We'll quickly move on to the pronouns, and we'll talk about the total possible ways an ism could be used. And that number is a large number, 22. So we'll ask the $1,000,000 question that if the ism could be used in 22 different ways, then why don't we have 22 different endings? That will then be resolved, and then we'll develop them. Okay, so without any further ado, let's push it over to the PowerPoint, and I'll continue speaking with you there. So welcome everyone to the final presentation in this free Arabic workshop. This video is going to be covering an incredible amount of material. Okay, so we're going to take the ism and develop the total possible ways an ism could be used. And if you go into any book of grammar, a good third of the book would be pretty much what we're covering today. So once we're done with this, okay, you're going to feel a sense of accomplishment, inshallah. And if you count up all of the hours from the beginning of this workshop, video 1, video 2, video 3, and also this fourth video, I don't think it adds up to more than 3.5 hours. It's probably more closer to the 3 hours. And obviously we can't cover all of grammar in 3 hours. I mean, that would be ridiculous. And it's not our goal to cover all of grammar right now anyways. We're just covering a very limited amount of the language that is absolutely required in order to begin reading. Because all of our focus right now is on beginning the reading. So the amount of examples we give throughout this introductory theory is less on purpose. Because once the book begins, every word, every phrase, and every sentence within the book becomes an example of one thing or another. So all of the things that were taught in the introductory theory, when they start appearing in the book, I immediately begin drawing attention to them. And then there's new elements that weren't taught here that appear in the book. I'll speak about them gradually based on need and necessity. So this is how reading within 21 days is achieved. Like, you don't learn the whole language in 21 days. You begin reading within 21 days. And just remember that Arabic is the first thing that the scholars study, and they continue studying it for the rest of their lives. So with that said, here's where we are right now. So as we know, in the Arabic language, the majority of meanings do not come from words. They come from, number 1, vowels, number 2, patterns, and number 3, grammatical structures. So all 3 of these have been spoken about in video 1. And patterns is the meanings that are achieved when the consonants are voweled in particular ways. Okay, or like the better way to explain this is to bring back the example from video 1. If you remember, the istansaru example, I've just brought it up here on the slide. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, right, obviously. But as a summary, basically what we're seeing on the slide is what looks like a single word, but it's actually a full sentence, and it's giving us 7 meanings. It translates to they sought help. Group of males sought help. The number of meanings are 7. Only one of those meanings is coming from the dictionary, and that's the help. The rest of the meanings, the notion of seeking, the past tense, the active voice, plus the aspects of the doer, the masculine gender, that's a group of men, and we're talking about the group of men. All of these meanings are either coming from the pattern or ending. So sarf is the science of classical Arabic that gives you 2 things: patterns and endings. Okay, and then the next thing is the vowels. When we say vowels, we're not talking about all vowels. Okay, so in this context, when we say the majority of meanings in Arabic don't come from words, they come from patterns, vowels and patterns and grammatical structures. Over here, when we say vowels, we're not talking about the vowel that's at the front or the vowel that's in the middle. Like the word rajul, for example, has a fatha on the ra and has a dhamma on the jim. Okay, now that's vocabulary. Okay, because you need to know that too. Because if you mispronounce the word, then it might become another word. Like the word rijulun means leg. So rajul means man and rijulun means leg. The letters are the same, the vowels are different. So that's a vocabulary issue. But the good news is that once you know what it is, once you know that the word man is pronounced rajul, it's always going to be like that. As opposed to the last letter vowel, because the last letter vowel fluctuates depending on how you use the word in a sentence. So sometimes it could be ar-rajulu, sometimes it could be ar-rajula, and sometimes it could be ar-rajuli, rajulun, rajulan, rajulin, al-baytu, al-bayta, al-bayti. So we're more concerned with this vowel at the end of the ism, because the vowel at the end of the noun is what differentiates between the role of the noun. And I'll speak about this again in the next couple of slides, and then we'll move on to developing the total possible ways an ism could be used. And the third area is grammatical structures. And grammatical structures is when you take 2 or more words and put them together in a particular way. The way in which the words are combined together give you more meaning than what you started off with. Okay, so why do we need the change that occurs on the last letter? Okay, we need it because whenever you have a verb and 2 nouns, you need to be able to tell which of the 2 nouns is the one doing the verb and which of the 2 nouns is the one upon whom the verb is being done. Every language needs to tackle this. And every language needs to come up with some method and some mechanism to be able to determine which one's which. So like the verb and the 2 nouns. So some languages do it through extra words. So by adding a 4th word and a 5th word, they can tell which noun is the one doing the verb and which noun is the one upon whom the verb is being done. Like ne and ko in Urdu. So they'll have the verb, they'll have the two nouns, and they'll have a fourth word and a fifth word. And some languages do it through maintaining a rigid sequence. So the noun at the very front is the doer of the verb is in the middle, and the object of the verb is third. And let's take examples of this very quickly. So in Urdu, they would say Zaid ne amar ko mara. Now, obviously, for the purpose of this example, you don't have to know Urdu, you don't need to know Urdu. It's just an example. But the main point is that you can see spaces. Like Zaid, and then there's a space, and then there's the ne, and then there's a space, and there's the amr. So it's clearly there's 5 words. So what's the purpose? The purpose of the ne is to tell us that the preceding word is a subject. The purpose of the ko is to tell us that the preceding word is the object, and the translation is Zaid hid amr. Okay? Now these are extra words, and they're there precisely for the purpose of distinguishing. Now, when you have these extra words, the benefit in that is you can now move it around. Okay, so there is flexibility in the word order. So if the one you're speaking to already knows that the hitting happened, and Zaid is the one that did the hitting, then you can switch it around and say Amr ko Zaid ne mara, and it will give you a little more precise of a meaning you're communicating, that it was Amr that Zaid hit. But the drawback is that you really do need 5 total words. In English, you can't move it around. In English, the number of words remain 3. Okay, remain 3, but then they specify the word order. So like the same example, Zayd hit Amr, the one that's at the front is the subject, the verb is in the middle, and the object's at the end. And if you try to move that around, you either change the meaning, and the one you want it to be the subject becomes the object, or it becomes meaningless. Now Arabic has a very particular way in distinguishing between the roles of the nouns. How is that done? It's done by giving distinct vowel endings to the nouns. So when you see one set of vowels, you know that this noun is the one doing the verb. And when you see the other set of vowels, you know that this noun is the one upon whom the verb is being done. And now you can literally arrange a verb and 2 nouns in 6 different ways. And all 6 of them are good. All 6 of them are valid. Okay, like you see on the slide here. Everything else being equal, the one you would use is the one that's circled in red. Because we mentioned in the second video that any sentence that has a verb, as a standard format, the verb should be at the front, okay, and the noun should not precede the verb. So it rearranges the sentence. So the subject gets pushed forward and the verb comes at the front. So daraba Zaydun Amran, it translates to Zayd hit Amr. Now the other 5 are available. The other 5 are there, and the other 5 also convey the same basic meaning, but then they're nuanced differently. Okay, so like for example, if the one you're speaking to already knows that the hitting happened and already knows that Zayd did the hitting, and the only new piece of information is that it was Amr that Zayd hit, then it wouldn't be appropriate to use the one that's circled in red, but instead you use the green one, the one that's circled in green. Amran daraba Zaydun. And as a second example, before we move forward, if the listener is confused and the one you're speaking to actually thinks that multiple people were involved in the hitting, so Zayd might have played a minor role and it might have been Khalid that did the bulk of the hitting. Okay, so to such a person, what you would say is Zaydun daraba Amran. Zaydun daraba Amran, and bring what should have been the doer of the verb in front of the verb, which really should not be allowed. But you're doing it, and what you're doing is you're creating a nominal sentence. So the translation now is that it was only Zayd that hit Amr. And when examples like this come in the stories of the Prophet's book, we draw attention to it and we explain it very thoroughly. Bottom line is that this is the need and necessity. Okay, this is why we have changes at the end of the nouns, because without them, there really would be confusion. If you strip the vowels from Zayd, if you strip the vowels from Amr, you would not know which one's which. So that's why we have it. Okay, but then the discussion on grammatical states is more than this. Okay, so what I just covered in the last 5 minutes is enough to get your foot in the door. Okay, but then we're going to have to explain it a little more thoroughly. Okay, and we're going to need to look at the total possible ways an ism could be used, and that's the purpose of the presentation. Okay, so let's go through our standard format. And I explained some of this at the end of video too, but I'll repeat it again right now, and then we'll continue and we'll develop them. Okay, we start with the human emotions and facial expressions analogy. So it goes like, human beings experience emotional states. People make us happy, angry, sad, embarrassed, etc. They treat us in particular ways. Okay, it happens because of interaction with other humans. So they treat us in ways that meet our expectations or they exceed our expectations, and as a result of that we become happy. And sometimes they fall short, and we're disappointed and we're frustrated, and sometimes we become angry and sad. And these emotions are then reflected on our faces. So by looking at the human being's face, you can tell what emotion they're experiencing. Arabic words behave in a similar fashion. Okay, words influence words. Like literally, they interact with one another and they induce change at the end of the nouns that follow them. Or they cause the upcoming word to be in grammatical states. So just like humans influence humans and humans affect humans and cause emotional states, words interact with one another and cause grammatical states. These states are then reflected on the last letter. So the human emotions are reflected on the face, and the states that the Arabic word experiences is reflected on the last letter. So by looking at the last letter, you can tell what state it's experiencing. Unlike human emotions, which are endless, grammatical states in Arabic are just 4. Grand total is 4. Okay, but one of them is not relevant to today's presentation. It's verb specific. It only happens in verbs, and it doesn't belong to the 4% of the language that gives you over half of all of your benefits. Or you can say it doesn't belong to the introductory theory that's absolutely required in order to begin any reading. So we're not going to talk about it today. Okay, so the states that the ism experiences, the noun, okay, are 3. And those 3 have names. And if you want to understand the 3 states that the ism experiences, the best thing now is to move into our second analogy, which is the pronouns analogy. Okay, so we see this happening. And when I say this, I'm talking about a particular meaning being conveyed in 3 different ways. Okay, based on how that word is being used within a sentence. So you're speaking about a male in the third person. There's 3 ways you can do that. You can say he, you can say him, and you can say his. So why do they have 3 ways of communicating a male in the third person? The reason is because the pronoun could be used in different ways. So when the pronoun is intended to be a subject of a verb, you say he came. When the pronoun is intended to be an object of a verb, you say I saw him. And when the pronoun is intended to be part of a possessive structure, you say his pen. So he, him, and his. So now, in English, when pronouns are used in different ways, there's different versions for them. But with nouns, that's not the case. So like if a house, for example, was occurring in 3 different sentences or 10 different sentences, you would not see any difference in the word house. It would be house, 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 house. In Arabic, on the other hand, all isms undergo change based on how they're used. So the change won't be the whole thing. The change will be the last letter. So we'll have 3 versions for most isms. So al-bayt has 3 versions. Al-baytu, al-bayta, al-bayti. And you can see this in the example here. So if you look at this slide, the word house is being used in 3 different ways. So the first example is saqat al-baytu, the house fell. The second example is dakhaltu al-bayta, I entered the house. And the third example is babul bayti, door of the house. So the third example is a phrase. It's not even a sentence. The point here is that the word al-bayt is being used in 3 different ways. So al-baytu means something different than al-bayta, which means something different than al-bayti. They're not all the same, because the first one, al-baytu, is house in its capacity as the doer of a verb. And the second example, al-bayta, is house in its capacity as an object of a verb. And the third one is house in its capacity as the second half of a possessive structure. So those are the 3 states. Okay, and they have names. So when the noun is a subject of a verb, we call that rafa. And when it's object, that's an example of nasab, and the third one's called jar. And the dominant reflection for rafa is dhamma, and the dominant reflection for nasab is fatha, and the dominant reflection for jar is kasra. So you can think of the rafa, nasab, and jar as 3 emotions like happiness, frustration, and depression, or whatever the case is, like three emotions. And the dhamma would be like the smile, okay, or the fatha would be like the frown, that from where you can tell that the person is depressed or the person is sad. Got it? Rafa, nasab, and jar. So what you need to do now is you need to mentally associate the 3, rafa, nasab, and jar, with the he, him, and the his. So mentally take the rafa and right beside it he. Take the nasab right beside it him, and take the jar and right beside it his. So when you do that, you're like halfway there in understanding what rafa, nasab, and jar are. Now, if the ism could be used in 3 different ways, and those 3 were called rafa, nasab, and jar, our discussion would be over. But unfortunately, the ism is a lot more complex than that. Okay? And the total possible ways an ism could be used in the Arabic language is a much larger number than 3. Okay? the total number of ways an ism could be used is actually 22. And the reason is because it's very broad. It doesn't just include nouns. It includes 4 of the English parts of speech, which I'll bring up to you on the next slide. Basically, the ism has to do a lot. It has to do a lot of heavy lifting, and it's not going to be able to do it if you restrict the total number of ways an ism could be used to 3. It's not going to happen, okay? Because if you remember this graphic from one of the previous videos, the ism is nouns, pronouns, adjectives, and adverbs. The way an adverb is used is very different than the way a noun is used in a sentence. Okay, like if I say today I hit Amr, so the word today is an adverb, and the word Amr is the object of the verb. And so adverbs, what they do is they answer the questions when, where, why, how. So if I have a verb followed by multiple isms, one of those isms would be the one doing the verb, because you can't have a verb without a doer. Another one of those isms might be the object of the verb. And then you'll have 3-4 more isms, and those additional isms would be adverbs, what in English we call adverbs, like the word today, the word under the tree, the word under, or the reason why the hitting happened. So the answers to the questions when, where, why, how. So if the speaker chooses to disclose all this information, what you're going to end up with is a long verbal sentence. And it's accurate to say that this is an example of a verb followed by 5 isms. Okay, so that's 5 ways an ism could be used. Like each one would count as 1. 5 ways an ism could be used, right? Okay. Right. So now so it's not just 3. The total possible ways an ism could be used is a lot larger. Okay, so we just took it to 5 right now. We have the doer, we have the object, we have the when, where, we have the why, we have the how. Okay? And even a generic adverb like very, or the word swiftly, or the word quickly. Okay, now also the reason why that number is so large is because we have numerous kinds of sentences, and the components of every sentence are labeled uniquely and differently. Okay, like in a previous presentation we talked about how there are sentences that start with nouns and there are sentences that start with verbs. The ones that start with nouns are called nominal sentences, and the ones that start with verbs are called verbal sentences. And when we talk about the components of each, we actually have more specific terms. So in a nominal sentence like the book is new, the subject is called mubtada and the predicate is called khabar. And in a verbal sentence, the verb would be at the front, and that's called fi'l. And then all of the details of the verb, the fa'il, the doer of the verb is called fa'il. And then if you have an object, then that has a name. If you have a when, where, then that has a name. If you have a why, you have a name. So we're already at 9 or 10, or maybe even 11 possible ways an ism could be used. So the question is, what's the total? The total number of ways an ism could be used is 22, but yet we only have 3 states. So the $1,000,000 question is, if the ism could be used in 22 different ways, why don't we have 22 different endings? Okay? The subject of a verb would have its own unique ending. The object of a verb would have its own unique ending. The answer to the question when, where would have its own unique ending. The why one would have its own ending. The generic adverb would have its own ending. The 2 halves of the nominal sentence, each one would have their own ending. So why don't we have more endings? How come we only have 3? The answer is because that would be redundant. Because that would be unnecessary. Okay? And there will be no need for that. The reason is because they don't line up side by side. Because many of them don't line up side by side. Okay, because we have nominal sentences, we have verbal sentences. So the first half of a nominal sentence, which is called mubtada, and the second half of a verbal sentence, which is called fa'il, those 2 never combine together. Okay? So look, here's a nominal sentence, al-kitabu jadidun, and here's an example of a verbal sentence, dhahaba zaydun, right? Okay? So if the subject of a nominal sentence, if that receives a dhamma, and the doer of a verb also receives a dhamma, then that's not problematic, because they're not gonna be seen side by side. So there's no distinguishing to do. Okay? And sometimes the kind of word gives it away. So like the best example I can give you of that is ضربت اليوم عمرا. So over here, the word al-yawm and the word amran have the same ending. Okay? But that's not problematic because only one of them could be the object of the verb, and that's amr. And amr is an entity. And the word al-yawm cannot be hit. You don't hit a day. today can only be the answer to the question when. So we know which one of the two is the adverb and which one of the two is the object. So the kind of word gives it away. So what we don't need is 22 different endings, and what we do need is the bare minimum amount of endings that would remove all confusion, and that number happens to be 3. Okay, so now it's a matter of taking the 22 possible ways an ism could be used and distributing them. So like 8, 12, and 2. Okay, so what is Rafa? Rafa doesn't mean subject. Rafa is a broad category of possible ways an ism could be used that all have a commonality of being reflected with Dhamma. So when something's in Rafa, you reflect it with Dhamma. Now what's in Rafa? The doer of a verb is in Rafa, like the house example suggested, right? And there's 7 others. Nasab is a broad category of total possible ways an ism could be used. 12 are included within this category, and they all have a commonality of being reflected with fatha. Okay, what is included within nasab? Object of a verb is included within nasab, like I entered the house, dakhaltul bayta. And then there's 11 others. And jar is when jar is a broad category again. This time the number of members are 2, and the dominant reflection is kasra. So 8, 12, and 2. So you need to understand them as broad categories and not ways an ism could be used. Rafa is not the name of a way an ism could be used. It's the name of 8 ways an ism could be used. So now let's take the total possible ways an ism could be used and tell you which ones belong in Rafa, which ones belong in Nasab, and which ones belong in Jar. And I'm not going to do it by first talking about the Rafa ones. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Tell you what they are, define them, give an example, move on to the next one, tell you what it is, define it, give an example. That's not how we go about introducing the topic. Because first of all, we're not going to do all 22. We're only going to do 15. And the reason is because some of them are obscure and your likelihood of encountering them in a book is like slim to none. Okay? Or they're not going to happen immediately. They don't have the broadest application. So we can go with the ones that are most dominant. Okay? And I'll cover 15 of them here. And then the rest of them that I'm not talking about here, you'll get them as we proceed forward. Within a month or within 2 months, you'll have all 22. And then we'll revisit the topic again. And at that point, I'll give you a version of this presentation that includes all 22. So that's how we do this. And then we have the grammar book, the 132-page grammar book, Hidayatul Nahu. And in that book, he covers them all. Okay, so everything that's taught here is then revisited again in much greater detail when we do the book in the second semester of the program. Okay? So 8, 12, and 2. So what we'll do here is we'll take the verbal sentence and we'll speak about what can happen in a verbal sentence. And, we'll give terms to all of those various adverbs, and then we'll slot them. And we'll tell you that from all of the things that we just developed, how many of them go in Rafa, how many of them go in Nasab, and we'll have 3 columns that we're developing essentially. So one column is the Rafa column, and there'll be 8 in there. And then there's the Nasab column, and then there's the Jar column. Okay? So the verbal sentence specific ways an ism could be used. So verbal sentences, they have to have a subject. Like you can't have a verb without a subject, and the subject is called fa'il. Remember that term, fa'il. Okay, now many verbs also have objects. Some verbs don't. Like dhahaba zaydun doesn't have an object because went is not the kind of meaning, going is not the kind of meaning that supports an object, but eating and drinking do. Because when you eat, you have to eat a food, and when you drink, you have to drink a beverage. So those would be verbal sentences that have 3 words. Same thing with hitting and helping. You'd have a doer of the hitting, and you'd have an object for the hitting. So the object, technically, it's called maf'ul bihi. So we have 5, we have maf'ul bihi. Verbs can also be passive. Now, if the verb is passive, what happens is the doer is suppressed. There's no doer in passive verbs, but instead, what was previously the object takes center stage, and the name changes, and we don't call it an object anymore, we call it a deputy doer. Naib fa'il. So we have fa'il, maf'ul bihi, and naib fa'il. Here are the examples. Zayd ate an apple. Akala Zaydun tufahan. Okay, so over here, akala is a verb, and Zayd is the doer of the verb, and tufahan, which is the apple, that's the object. And if you take away Zayd and turn the akala to ukila, then the apple now becomes definite. Now the focus is on the apple. And not only that, but the last letter would be a dhamma, ukila tufahu. The apple was eaten. Zayd ate the apple versus the apple was eaten. Okay, so over here we have 3 so far, fa'il, maf'ul bihi, and naib fa'il. And then there's different kinds of adverbs, which we'll develop on the next slide, right? So there's the generic adverb. And when I say generic, I mean there's no time or place connotation. It's not answering the question when or where, and it's also not giving you reason or cause. So such an adverb is called maf'ul mutlaq. It has a name. Just remember these terms. They're coming on the next slide. So when it's a generic adverb, that's called maf'ul mutlaq. And the example is farihtu kathiran, I became very happy. Now, time and place, when you're answering the questions when and where, the particular adverb for that is called maf'ul fi. And the example is daraba al-yawma zaydun amran. Today, Zayd hit Amr. So the word today is answering the question when. Okay, so that's an ism. And kathiran is an ism. Kathiran is an ism, al-yawm is an ism. They're all isms. And when you're giving the reason why an action takes place, like I hit him for the purpose of discipline, darabtuhu ta'diban, the word ta'dib on its own means discipline, but when used like this, it means for the purpose of discipline. So it's for discipline. It's giving the reason why. So we're going to call that the adverb of reason and cause. And then we have the circumstantial adverb, Zayd came to me riding. So the word riding is describing the state of Zayd when he was doing the coming. Okay, so there's four here. There's the generic one called maf'ul mutlaq. There's the time and place one, which is called maf'ul fi. The reason and cause one, which is called maf'ul lahu. And the circumstantial one, which is called hal. Remember those terms. And we had the fa'il and naib fa'il already, and maf'ul bihi on the previous slide. So now we have 7 of them. Here's how they're slotted. So 2 of them are places of rafa. So whenever there's a verb followed by a doer, the doer will end in dhamma, like akala zaydun tufahan. And if the verb is passive, it becomes ukilat tufahu with a dhamma. So fa'il and naib fa'il both belong in rafa. And the object of the verb, like in the first example, akala zaydun tufahan, that's called maf'ul bihi. That's called maf'ul bihi. And then the 4 adverbs that we saw on the previous slide, first one was the generic one, maf'ul mutlaq, farihtu kathiran, I became very happy. The next one was the when where one, like today I hit Amr, today Zayd hit Amr, daraba al-yawma Zaydun amran. So the word al-yawma is the example. Or daraba Zaydun amran tahta shajaratin. Tahta shajaratin. Zayd hit Amr under a tree. So the word under, tahta, is ending in a fatha, and that's like when where. So the Arab people, the grammar people, they took the when one and they took the where one, and they said that, this is all one. The adverb of time and place. So although, if they separated them, then conceivably it could have been 23 possible ways and it could be used, but they have their reasons. Like, we don't have to argue about that. They have their reasons, the grammar people. They took the when one and the where one, and they chose to call that a single possible way an ism could be used. Adverb of time and place is called maf'ul fi. And then we have our reason and cause, adverb of reason and cause, and that's the one that should have existed in English but doesn't. Like in English, they don't really have that because there's no such thing as disciplinarily. Okay, it doesn't exist, does it? Like Zayd hit Amr disciplinarily. I mean, it doesn't make sense. You say Zayd hit Amr for the purpose of discipline. So you have to actually say for the purpose of discipline. Arabic doesn't have to do that. Arabic, you can just put the word there and, I stood out of respect. I hit Zayd for the purpose of discipline. قمت إكراما and ضربته تأديبا. Okay? And our final adverb is the circumstantial one, which is called hal. And the classic example for that is Zayd came to me riding. Okay, so we're at 7 now. Okay, and we had to get to 15. We have 7 of them. What's common between all 7 of these is that they all occur in verbal sentences. Now, we have another kind of sentence called the nominal sentence. And the nominal sentence is basically the book is new, right? The book is new, al-kitabu jadidun. The first half of it's called mubtada, and the second half of it's called khabar. And as you see in the example, the mubtada is ending in dhamma, al-kitabu. It has a last letter is the dhamma, and jadidun is also last letter dhamma, right? Now, the thing with nominal sentences is that there's kana version sentences as well. Kana version sentences and inna version sentences. So if you put a kana at the front of a nominal sentence, then that would result in relabeling. So what was previously mubtada, we no longer call it mubtada because it's not first anymore. Now we have kana at the front, so it's called the ism of kana, and what previously was the predicate is now called the predicate of kana. Okay, the khabar of kana. So ism of kana, khabar of kana. Same thing with inna. If you put inna at the front of a nominal sentence, then it results in relabeling, and what used to be mubtada is now called the ism of inna. So now there's 6 terms here, if you're paying attention. We have our basic ones, mubtada and khabar, and then we have 2 for the kana sentence and 2 for the inna sentence. So now the question is, which one of those go in rafa, which one of those goes in nasab, and how do we distribute them? Okay, so these 2 clearly go in rafa, right? The mubtada and the khabar. And in the kana sentence, the first one is in rafa, the second one's in nasab. Okay, and the translation changes obviously because kana means was. So instead of the book is new, it becomes the book was new, but that's besides the point. The example is كان الكتاب جديدا. So notice that al-kitabu is retaining its dhamma, but jadid is just changing state altogether, and instead of jadidun, it's jadidan. So that would be an example of nasab. And the names change. We don't call it mubtada anymore, we call it ism of kana. And we don't call it khabar anymore, we call it khabar of kana. Now in the inna sentence, inna means indeed, so when you put inna at the front of a mubtada and khabar, then it results in a sentence like you're seeing on the screen, inna al-kitaba jadidun. So ism of inna, khabar of inna. So just by looking at the endings, from those 6, essentially the mubtada and khabar both go in rafa, and then the first of the kana and the second of the inna go in rafa, and the second of the kana and the first of the inna go in nasab. So here's what we have so far. So at the top in rafa there's mubtada and khabar. In other words, both halves of the basic nominal sentence are places of rafa, and then there's the doer of the verb called fa'il, there's the deputy doer called naib fa'il, there's the primary part of the kana sentence called ism of kana, and the second half of the inna sentence called khabar of inna. And then on the nasab side, we had our previous ones that were developed when we were talking about the verbal sentence. Maf'ul bihi, object of a verb. Maf'ul mutlaq, generic adverb. Maf'ul fi, adverb of time and place. Maf'ul lahu, adverb of reason and cause. Hal, which is the circumstantial adverb, they came to me riding. And then the second half of the kana sentence, khabar of kana, and the first half of the inna sentence, ism of inna. And okay, so now we've exhausted the places in the language that occur in verbal sentences, and we've also talked about 6 places of the 6 ways an ism could be used that happen in either basic nominal sentences or modified nominal sentences. So they're nominal sentence specific, and the word nominal means beginning with a noun as opposed to verbal. Okay. Now there's some of the 22 places that can occur independent of verbal sentences and nominal sentences, and they're more to do with phrases. Okay, because if you remember about phrases, sometimes the phrase is such that both parts of the phrase match in state. Okay, so like in a descriptive phrase, if you say something like tall boy, the word boy would come first, the word tall would come second, and you say waladun tawilun. And then if a tall boy came, you'd say waladun tawilun. If you saw a tall boy, it would be waladan tawilan. And if you pass by a tall boy, after a preposition, it would be waladin tawilin. So now the first half of that is called mawsuf, and the second half is called sifa. Neither of those terms are going to appear here in our list of 22. The reason is because once the phrase is constructed, you still have to use it, right? You still have to use it. Once the phrase is constructed, those 2 words would now function as a single unit. So what determines whether it's waladun tawilun or waladan tawilan or waladin tawilin is the same thing that determine al-baytu, al-bayta, al-bayti, which is what we're talking about anyways. Now sometimes what happens is that the phrase is made up of 2 words, and the first word fluctuates but the second doesn't. So when that happens, that second one belongs here. It belongs in the 22 places. And the example is like a possessive structure. In a possessive structure, if I say Zayd's book, Kitabu Zaydin, the word kitab can conceivably be Kitaba Zaydin, and it could conceivably be Kitabi Zaydin. And if you guess that the reason that is because the 2 will function as a single unit, and it could be like, this is Zayd's book. Hada Kitabu Zaydin. I read Zayd's book. Qara'tu Kitaba Zaydin. I looked in Zayd's book. Nadartu fi kitabi Zaydin. You see? So what's common in all 3 of those examples is the word Zayd is Zaydin, Zaydin, Zaydin. This is not on the slide. Okay? Like hopefully so you don't think that there's something wrong here. This is I'm about to introduce 2 more. So basically any second half of a possessive structure will end in kasra, and that belongs here. So second half of a possessive structure and has a particular name is called mudaf ilayh. Okay, the alif is missing there it's called mudaf ilayh. And coming after a preposition is the only other place in the language where an ism would be in the state of jar, and that's simply called majroor. So the example of a possessive structure, second half in particular, is door of the house, babul bayti. So al-bayti there is in jar, and if they ask you why is it in jar, the correct answer is because it's mudaf ilayh. And the example of coming after a preposition is in the house, fil bayti. So now when you take the mudaf ilayh and the majroor and you add that to the previous, now we have 15. And this is 15 of the 22 ways an ism could be used. And now within Rafa, there's still a couple that need to be developed. and within nasab there's still quite a few that need to be developed. But like I said, those remaining ones do not have the broadest application. They don't need to be taught now. They could be taught to you when you first encounter them in the book. And when I say book, I'm talking about this. Okay? So at this stage, the amount of grammar we've covered is pretty considerable. Okay, now I'm not expecting that everybody that watched through these videos totally, 100% understands everything that was covered, much less able to retain it. Okay, that's not the point, because the point is to rewatch this a couple of times. Because you can spend 16 hours covering what we covered here in 3. Okay, and still not be able to do it properly. If the topics are not sequenced properly, that won't happen. Like, you won't cover everything we've covered. So would you spend 16 hours or 30 hours trying to get to this stage, or rewatch 3 hours maybe 2 times or 3 times? You're still ahead. If you watch it 3 times, you're still ahead. Okay, so when material is new, one needs to be willing to rewatch more than once. Okay, it's not because the material is confusing. It's not because you're a poor learner or you don't have the mental capacity to be able to pick it up the first time. It's got nothing to do with that. It's simply because the material is new. You see, and what we're teaching here is actually coming from the classics. Okay, and those classics are written by scholars that actually knew how to write. So within a sentence or within 2 sentences, they would say something so profound that you can create a half-an-hour presentation on it. You see, so that's the power of the classics, like the Alfiya of Ibn Malik and the Hidayat al-Nahu book. So what we've done here is we haven't taught all of grammar, but we've taught enough grammar to now begin reading. And what you're seeing on the slide is a scan of the first opening 3-4 lines from the Stories of the Prophets book. So in week 3, we would start this. And we translate the heading, Man kasar al-asnam, who broke the idols? And we say, okay, who broke the idols? Is this a verbal sentence or is this a nominal sentence? So people would look at the man and they draw the conclusion that man is a pronoun because it means who. And who in English is a pronoun, so it must be an ism. So therefore the sentence is nominal. And then we pose the second question. And then we pose the third question. And then we move in and we say before many days. Qabla means before. So now before is ending in a fatha. So why is it ending in a fatha? So if you say because it indicates on time, so it's maf'ul fi, then you would be right. Okay, and then we look at the relationship between many days, the word ayyamin and the word kathiratin, and we start drawing attention to these things, but we wouldn't speak about everything. We'd speak about the things that can easily be extracted and easily be understood, and we translate, and simultaneously we'd give them the vocabulary, obviously. You need to know that the word rajul means man, and you need to know that the word kathir means many, and kasara means to break, and asnam means idols. Okay, is that fine? So through a video, the teacher would be going through this, okay, and they'd have a separate PDF that has the vocabulary of the words appearing in the book. So once you know the meaning of the word, and then you can see, and then what we're doing is we're bringing the theory to life, essentially. Okay, we're bringing the theory to life, and if I had time, I'd do that for you right now. Okay, if I had time, I'd do that for you now, but unfortunately we're gonna have to stop here, but I will tell you how to take this to the next level. There's a particular book in grammar, it's called Hidayat al-Nahu, and it's about 132 pages, and I've taught that book 42 times, and I continue to reteach it 3 times a year, every single year. And every time I reteach that book, my appreciation for the author and the material in the book increases, and I get new insights. And whenever a complex topic comes and I'm explaining it, the tone of my voice changes. And the students, they recognize that, and they really love that intensity. And one would not expect that. So if you teach the same book over and over so many times, then your interest for it would probably diminish and you would not be enthusiastic about teaching it. But that's not what happens with me. Alhamdulillah, I've been doing this for a long time. And what we've shared with you over the last 10 days, if it resonated with you, and if you want to understand more and more of the messages Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has willed for you, then I strongly encourage you to consider signing up for the program. So there's still a couple of days before registration formally opens, so you can offer Salatul Istikhara, make some dua, think about it, ask some questions, email the help desk, and then the video that I'll have for you that explains the program, inshallah, will answer all of your questions. And it will mention exactly what the tuition is, what's the payment plan, and every other question that you can have regarding the program will be answered for you in a separate video. So I really loved creating this free series for you, and I enjoyed it, and I hope you enjoyed it as well. And I look forward to speaking with you soon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.